Chapter 1453. No one knew how old Master felt when he heard his little grandson say, "I was wrong." He knew his grandson better than anyone. It was probably related to his birth. No matter how humble his family was, his pride couldn't be changed. Not to mention that he had been very sensible since he was young. Even if he had done some black-bellied things and was thrown into the army, he had never said the words, "I was wrong." Old Master, who had always doted on his grandson, felt his heart ache. But there was nothing he could do. If the Bow family really disappeared, no one would be able to find them. This was the rule of the underworld. At this moment, Old Master thought of something. Someone was spending a lot of money to buy information about hackers. Could this be related? But no matter what, even if it was related, he couldn't contact them. The family fell into a silence that they had never experienced before. In fact, it was normal. If a certain little tiger had never appeared. Perhaps this was the normal state of the family. After all, Chin Mo only liked to play chess and read books. He didn't want to play with anyone. It wasn't strange that the family was quiet. But that little tiger had appeared. Not just appeared. He even bought snacks for her in his drawer. Because that little tiger loved to climb over the wall. There was never a quiet time when she crawled around and her body would get dirty from time to time. He had to wash her hands many times a day. So at Chin Mo's place, he would even prepare 3 sets of little tiger clothes in the closet. Not to mention the small meat pads he bought for her that were afraid of her own hands. People always said, "When you see something familiar." But there was never that familiar person again. His heart would feel empty. Chin Mo didn't feel empty. He played the games she played, climbed the walls she climbed, and even did something on the 10th day, breaking the window. It turned out that sometimes what was shown in the movies was real. Only by sleeping in the place where she used to be could he close his eyes and wait for dawn. If a certain little tiger was here, she definitely wouldn't have thought that he would do such a thing. Chin Mo glanced out of the window indifferently. His fingers pressed on the pillow that a certain someone often rested on. This state lasted for half a month. Old Master knew that it couldn't go on like this. When he brought his grandson abroad, he hoped that he would be more cheerful. Now he was in this state. Grandpa was really worried that something would happen. But there were some things that were difficult to say. Until 20 days later. During lunch, Grandpa brought up the topic. "Mo, your mom and dad have both gone home. Your dad said he wants to bring you along before he goes to the army." Grandpa thought about it too. "If you stay in the army, there will be more people accompanying you." Old Master only wanted his grandson to have a change of environment. After all, he was still a child. Perhaps he had forgotten something. Not so much. Grandpa was afraid that his grandson wouldn't be able to wait for the little tiger of the Bow family and would fall first. Unexpectedly, that little person put down the knife and fork in his hand, but there was no emotion on his handsome little face. "Okay." Grandpa was stunned by that one word. He didn't expect his grandson to agree so quickly. "But grandfather, you have to promise me one thing." Chin Mo lowered his voice. "Don't sell this place. If she comes back, she won't be able to find it." Chapter 1454. Okay. Grandpa Ann's voice was hoarse when he said this word. He thought that his grandson had thought it through. Until the little figure stood outside the Bow family's courtyard and looked at the window for the entire afternoon. Grandpa then realized that it didn't seem to be the case. Chin Mo held a talisman in his hand and pulled his little panda suitcase with one hand. That abstinent little face was even more indifferent than before. After getting into the car, he said, "Grandpa, I want to go to Wutai Mountain after returning to China." Wutai Mountain? Grandpa glanced sideways. After all, his grandson had never been interested in this aspect. Buddhism? Chin Mo replied and looked down at the talisman in his hand. Wutai Mountain. Grandpa had never rejected his grandson's requests. Especially at this moment. Because when his grandson tilted his head and looked at the scenery outside the window, his head was lowered. 3 days later. Wutai Mountain. There weren't many people who came to worship. Anyone who has studied the Dharma would know. The 1st and 15th day of the first month was the day when the incense was the most popular. But today, the 7th day. The number 7 in China had an ordinary meaning. But on this day. On the long stairs. Thousands of steps. A small figure with an indifferent side profile and a thin layer of sweat on his forehead bowed as he walked. A total of 999 bows. Sweat soaked his sweater. His black hair was steaming. But it didn't seem to affect his nobility. Maybe it was because he was really too young. The young novice monks saw it and watched. There was still snow on the mountain top. The snowflakes would only turn into water when they landed on the head. The young novice monks saw the figure getting closer and closer. Some of them jogged into the temple. Master, Master, there's someone outside, there's someone outside. The old monk who was knocking on the wooden fish put down the Buddhist book and glanced up at the young novice monk. Impatient, when does the mountain not have people coming? Where did all the Buddhist books you read go? No, go out and take a look, there's a child. The young novice monk was a child himself. How could he say that others were children? The old monk shook his head and walked with the smell of sandalwood. He didn't pay much attention at first. When he saw the figure bowing with each step, he paused for a moment before chanting, Amitabha. The cold wind blew. Between the mountain streams, snowflakes fell on the shoulders of the figure, but the little boy's face was even more eye-catching than the mountain full of snow. That scene was very much like Sangyang Gyatso's poem. He said, that year, I kowtowed and crawled on the mountain path, not to see you, but to feel your warmth. In that life, I went around mountains, rivers, and pagodas, not to cultivate my next life, but to meet you on the way. In that instant, I ascended to become an immortal, not for longevity, but to ensure your safety and happiness. The old monk was waiting for that noble little figure to walk in front of him. Qin Mo understood etiquette. Even though there was sweat on his forehead, he still bowed and greeted, Master. 999 steps of worship, no matter when it was, he had to fulfill this wish of his. The old monk looked down, but there was helplessness in his eyes. Young benefactor, where are you from? What do you want? Qin Mo pulled out a red string from his neck. There was an amulet tied to the end of the red string. Someone asked for this for me. Master, can you give me a piece of Buddha's words? Do you believe in Buddhism? The old monk asked. Qin Mo shook his head. I only believe in myself. The old monk asked again, then why did you come to ask for Buddha's words? Chapter 1455. The old monk was stunned. He chanted Amitabha again and led Qin Mo into the hall. The scripture was flipped to the 10th volume. The monk's robe fluttered, the ink and the incense. There was only one sentence left on the paper. I hope that the little tiger in pajamas can live a peaceful and happy life. Then, someone carefully protected a talisman and wore it at the position closest to his heart. Regardless of whether it was in the military, studying in a foreign country, or after finishing his studies, he stood at the borders and protected his country. There was someone who always wore a talisman that didn't match his identity. The day they quarreled. The two children didn't know what was going to happen. Even the little tiger thought that she would come and look for Momo after she was done with what she needed to do. Until after the darkness. Her father brought her to the tombstone. He caressed her hair and told her, Jill, the best way to protect the most important person is to make others think that she isn't that important. Otherwise, become stronger. Don't leave any traces. You should know that for a hacker who lives behind a computer, the exposure of traces and private life is fatal. It's the same for you and other hackers. From now on, you will be the young lord. I told you the rules of being a young lord a long time ago. Protect the people you need to protect. Use the keyboard in your hand to speak up for injustice. Hence, the little tiger had been enduring. She learned more things and created more powerful little games. She didn't just use it for confessions. Instead, she mixed viruses into it. She even learned how to write calligraphy, read bedtime stories, roll up her sleeves and tie her scarf. She didn't wear the little tiger pajamas anymore. She didn't need to act cute anymore. She didn't need to wag her tail and follow behind anyone. Not everyone could give her a piece of candy when she was naughty. Not everyone would be afraid of her toothache and check the small pockets on her clothes. The smell of being drowned in darkness. Probably, when she slept, she could only hug her little keyboard. Bo Jiu was still sensible. She understood the current situation. She endured for 101 days. 3 months. She couldn't bear it anymore. For the first time, she took a car alone and ran to the Inn family. Even though she knew that she wouldn't find anything, she still ran to the window. There was no one. He must have returned to China. Bo Jiu was wearing a black t-shirt. Her aura seemed to have changed, her small figure blending into the darkness. The old butler watched from the side. He really couldn't bear to see this happen. He walked over with a black umbrella. "Young master, let's go back." The little figure lowered his head and didn't say anything. The old butler turned his head away and gradually fell silent. Later on, there was a period of time when the young lord would always tell him how good her little princess was to her. She would stop from time to time. The old butler still remembered that master had carried the young lord up and placed her on his neck, letting her grab his hair while she was asleep. Dressed in a black windbreaker, it looked like he was smiling, but there were more things on his face. "Alan, there are some things that are more painful to remember clearly. Jiu is still too young." It was a casual remark. However, the old butler understood what his master meant. It was slightly hypnotic. It would always make people hide some of their memories. Wait until you see that person. Those memories would come back bit by bit. When Mr. Bo bent down, he planted a kiss on the little tiger's forehead. "Jiu, you must understand who you are. Understand who you are. Everything will come back. Have you ever thought of raising a person?" Bo Jiu did. She wanted to raise little Princess Qin. Chapter 1456. It was probably because he liked it too much. Even General Qin could vaguely guess his son's thoughts. It wasn't old Master An who said it. It was because Qin Mo had a high fever after coming down from Mount Wutai. Before he had followed him to the military, he had tugged on his sleeves, asking him to show mercy to those who were good at using the keyboard. In reality, those who knew Qin Mo would know that he had taken on many cases and he was more interested in hacking. Back then, Qin Mo was still wearing his number 1 middle school uniform. He was a handsome young man with delicate features and an elegant demeanor. No one could link this unbelievably handsome high school student with the Almighty who had solved many cases. Many people said that they didn't know what the Almighty was thinking. His emotions were so calm that they couldn't tell if he was happy or angry, yet he was elegant and noble. He could easily portray the mind of a criminal. He didn't seem like a high school student at all. He was cold like an iceberg that wouldn't melt in 1,000 years. No one had ever seen him smile. But they had seen him feeding stray cats by the roadside. They also knew that he had a house cat called Princess. No one could figure it out. Why would a male cat be called Princess? Without a doubt, Qin Mo was a genius. He was often praised in this way as well. "I never expected an ice cube like you to come from the Qin family." This was what Director Huang had said when he had first met Qin Mo, laughing heartily. At that time, Qin Mo had been looking down at the corpse beneath his feet. After hearing his words, his gloved hands touched the bloodstains on the ground, lifting his lids slightly. Director Huang's stomach hadn't been as round back then, like a balloon at most. When he saw Ice Cube Qin glance at him, he thought he was going to say something. After all, he was a senior and a bureau chief. Excuse me, please. The voice was very light. It was indeed a little emotional when it was said by a person wearing a high school uniform. But wait a minute, this wasn't the right attitude to speak to the bureau chief. This little Chin, he had to be taught a lesson. Director Huang was about to use his authority. Chin Mo added casually, "Your tummy is too big, it's affecting my ability to see the clues." Director Huang. Kids nowadays, if they were a little smarter, they could fly. Uncle Huang, you should understand that the case is more important. Chin Mo seemed to have guessed his thoughts. He slowly took off his gloves. When he did that, for some reason, he looked like a deacon in a manga. He was so handsome that the students weren't even afraid of a dead person. Director Huang coughed, but before he could speak, the voice rang out again, this time with a hint of coldness. "It's not a suicide, it's a homicide. The traces of blood don't look right. If it was a suicide, it wouldn't be left here. Also, the killer took another person with him." Director Huang knew it wasn't suicide. After all, he was experienced and could tell. But what did the criminal mean by taking another person away? Phone. Chin Mo glanced sideways, his gaze landing on the bushes at the side. There's a phone that doesn't belong to the murderer or the victim. Director Huang was in disbelief. How do you know it isn't the murderer? Uncle Huang, this is a serial killer. How stupid would the murderer be to leave his phone at the scene? Chin Mo asked casually. Director Huang choked from the poison. This Ice Cube Jr. wasn't cute at all. Since you're so good at solving cases, I'll put up with you. Chapter 1457. Right at this moment, Director Huang watched as Chin Mo took another step forward, suddenly saying, "The culprit is at the scene." At the scene? Director Huang's first reaction was to deny it. How is that possible? Nothing is impossible. Only by appearing here would he be able to clear his suspicion. Under what circumstances would he be able to kidnap a person after killing one? It's obvious that an acquaintance committed the crime. The murderer is smart enough to know that the police would guess this. That's why he deliberately appeared at the scene to show that he has nothing to do with this case and create an alibi. After all, if the murderer is here, no one would suspect that he kidnapped the person. Chin Mo glanced over, his eyes filled with indifference. Nothing is impossible. Only by appearing here would he be able to wash away suspicion. His voice wasn't loud or soft. When it came slowly, Director Huang's expression changed. Director Huang's expression changed instantly as he turned to speak into the earpiece. "Seal off the area, make all the students stay here." Roger. Even though he wasn't sure why Director Huang had given such an order, the crime squad had always been on the move. But, there were too many people around, which one was the culprit? Just as Director Huang was thinking about it, the person in the high school uniform walked towards the crowd, giving him a hand signal. It was obvious he was telling him not to come over. He was obviously younger than the group of university students, but because of his elegance, his aura was much higher. The onlookers didn't know that the person who solved the case was a high school student. Hence, when Chin Mo walked towards them, some of the female university students blushed, whispering amongst themselves. They had never seen such a boy before. Chin Mo's gaze locked onto one person, looking at his gloomy gaze. He pressed the Bluetooth earpiece beside him. "I found the culprit." Director Huang sprinted over the moment he received the news. His first reaction was to look for a well-built male student. But after searching for half a day, there were only females, no males. "Where is the culprit?" Director Huang lowered his voice. Chin Mo glanced up when he saw that the person was about to leave. "In front of me." Director Huang stilled, unable to believe it. After all, the other party wasn't just a girl, she was dressed rather adorably and wasn't tall. How could such a person be the culprit? After all, this was a serial murder case. "You're not going to attack?" Chin Mo arched a brow. He turned and kicked the branch with his long leg. I'm going to attack. The girl, who wanted to pretend that nothing had happened and walk away, only felt a whooshing sound. Her back was hit hard by something. Then, she was pressed to the ground by the police. She seemed to have realized something. After a pause, she shouted loudly, "What are you doing? What's so great about the police? What right do they have to arrest me? Shut up." The crime squad didn't want to spread the news. The girl became even more restless. "I'm going to sue you. Before I sue you, you will be sentenced to death." An indifferent voice came along with the long legs. It was the high school student. The girl paused again. "From the start, the way you looked at the scene was different from others. When I walked over, you didn't even look at me. A normal girl wouldn't be in the mood to look at the scene after seeing me." Director Huang. Was this a honey trap? Chapter 1458. After listening to Qin Mo, the girl's face turned pale but she still scoffed. "What evidence do you have to prove that I'm the murderer? That's hilarious, I've been here the whole time. Isn't the evidence in your hands?" Qin Mo lowered his lids, his gaze faint. "The technology is very advanced, it can detect the blood stains on your hands, even if it's just a tiny bit." The girl started to struggle violently. She seemed to be indignant, she had done it so discreetly, no one should know. Director Huang was an experienced policeman, and with one look at her expression, he could tell that she was up to no good. He got the plain clothes to bring her away. He turned to ask Qin Mo, still curious. "How did you know she was a girl?" To be able to use a scheme to kill, it means that the murderer can easily lower one's guard. Obviously, a girl is more likely to be the murderer. Qin Mo replied nonchalantly, glancing over to take the coffee he had gotten someone to prepare, behaving like a young master. Director Huang felt stifled. "I understand, there are so many freshmen in the police academy, why don't you start a topic for them?" "Uncle Huang." Qin Mo took a sip of the coffee. "I'm expensive, unless you have a case I'm interested in." Director Huang laughed. "Of course I do. Listen up. Help me mentor new students for half a month and I'll assign you the international case I want you to do. Otherwise, I'll get someone else to do it." Qin Mo's gaze wavered. 3 days. You're using 3 days instead of half a month. Director Huang was on the verge of cursing. Qin Mo lifted his eyelids, still holding on to the coffee. 1 day. Director Huang gritted his teeth. 3 days it is. Qin Mo threw the empty coffee cup into the bin, his voice calm. "It's a pleasure working with you, but Uncle Huang, I will report you to the station for abusing your power and threatening your subordinates." Director Huang, he really wanted to hit him. He was famous at a young age. It was undoubtedly an eyesore. Even when he was explaining the case, many people weren't convinced. After all, he was just a high school student. But as he analyzed the case, his godlike predictions and psychological tests were written. It made people understand the principle. Geniuses had the right to be arrogant. 3 days. Qin Mo analyzed the case for 3 days. On the 4th day, he was already on a plane to Fifth Avenue in his high school uniform. It couldn't be helped. After all, there were still more than 20 days before the college entrance examination. In some ways, he was still a student. But even so, his appearance still attracted the attention of many people, and the air stewardesses walked up to him more than once. After all, there were not many people who wore school uniforms and sat in first class. The reason why he was in such a hurry was because of the files he had seen at Director Huang's place. The people at Fifth Avenue seemed to have investigated his information and knew about the cases he had handled in the country. They also knew which university he had graduated from and what kind of cases he was interested in. Therefore, the files were very accurate. International criminal. Z. Gender, unknown. Blood, unknown. Age, unknown. Nationality, unknown. The only thing that was written was the enemy's area of expertise, using the internet to launch large-scale attacks, but never leaving a trace. There was also a comment attached below. Chapter 1459. It was really a meaningless file. Other than a code name, there was nothing else. However, Chin Mo was very interested in it. No, or rather, other than interest, there was something else that no one could see. Once again, he came overseas. Chin Mo's expression didn't seem to change much. His gaze was very faint. Only when he hooked the amulet on his neck did there be a slight change. It seemed to have deepened and also seemed to have become deeper. It was a gaze that would appear when he missed someone. This place was very close to Los Angeles. It was very close to the place where he used to live. When Chin Mo got off the plane, a golden-haired man with thick eyebrows waved his arms. Hey, here, here. Chin Mo glanced sideways. He stuffed one hand into his pocket and looked in that direction. The golden-haired man extended his hand and greeted in a very American way. I am Whis. You are Chin, right? If your people didn't say that you are still a student, I really wouldn't have imagined it. Oh my God, you are really amazing. I have seen the cases that you handled. Every single one of them is very shocking. What exactly is hidden in your brain? Ah, sorry, that's not what I meant. I mean, how did you reconstruct the criminal's crime process so perfectly? This is too inhuman. Do you know, I only see people like you in the movies. You wrote Z's evaluation. He must be a magician because only a magician can come and go without a trace. Chin Mo interrupted him and recited a sentence from the file, word for word. When the golden-haired man heard this, his eyes widened. How did you know I wrote it? Chin Mo didn't say anything. After all, this kind of guess was too easy. Instead, he changed his tone. In your eyes, is Z also someone who only appears in the movies? Yes. The golden-haired man's face was serious. His nose bridge was still high. Chin, ever since Z came out, he publicly placed the criminal at our doorstep. At the start, it was still fine. After all, there were people helping to solve the case. However, after a long time, it will affect our reputation. Moreover, when he did these things, he was in the gray area. Hence, we planned to capture him and have a good talk. I couldn't catch him at all. Can you imagine? One time, I watched him slip away right in front of my eyes. Chin Mo paused. You mean you've seen him? Ah. He should have seen it before. The blonde man hesitated when he said this. Chin Mo's voice was calm. I didn't see their faces, but I should be able to tell if they're male or female. Of course. I'm pretty sure he's a man. When the blonde man got excited, he even described, he always drove the coolest motorcycle, wore a black trench coat, and wore the latest helmet. He passed right in front of me. Chin Mo absorbed the information and asked, how did you know he was a man? Isn't it obvious? A cool motorcycle. The blonde man emphasized the main point. MMH. Chin Mo nodded and gestured for him to look to his left. A blue-haired girl was wearing a motorcycle helmet. Her voice was calm. A cool motorcycle. The blonde man. Chapter 1460. Just as the golden-haired man was clenching his fists and lowering his head in frustration, the monotonous voice rang in his ears again. What other information do you have? Since you've interacted with him many times, you should be able to gather some information. If you really don't have any, you can tell me the process. The process of the case. The golden-haired man immediately said. Because it's too unbelievable every time, we kept a lot of live videos. After all, Z would make a notice every time he wanted to arrest someone. That's the biggest headache. But this method is not bad. If the influence is big, those rich and powerful people won't use other methods to influence the final verdict. Some people are especially good at using the loopholes of the internet. Chin Mo followed his guidance and opened the car door. When he heard what he said, he raised his eyebrows. His gaze was very calm. You seem to admire Z, that's hard to say. Anyway, we have to arrest him. The golden-haired man wanted to pretend to be profound. Chin Mo didn't continue his sentence. Instead, he said calmly, let's take a look at the live video first. It was probably because this person's noble aura was too strong. The golden-haired man always felt that this person wasn't easy to approach. He was just a high school student. Why did he look so cold? However, when he thought about his identity, the golden-haired man's thoughts changed again. Those piles of cases couldn't be solved by an incompetent person. Moreover, from the information they received, no matter how suspicious or old a case was, he would be able to uncover the culprit in a very short time. He was one step faster than the criminal and could predict the criminal's whereabouts. It seemed like only such a person wouldn't be bewitched by Z. The more the golden-haired man thought about it, the more he felt that their chances of success this time were very high. After all, this was someone they hired secretly. They didn't go through the internet process and they didn't spread the news. Z probably didn't even know that he was the one who came to pick him up. Time passed by a little more. It was almost dusk. The sky on Fifth Avenue was always so blue. White doves and square fountains could be seen everywhere. The wide and spacious road was very suitable for racing. Hence, many of the blockbusters that we saw in the cinemas were filmed here. However, people who weren't locals wouldn't know. There was also a culture here called the street culture. There was also a zone here called the gray zone. There were a lot of gangsters gathered there. There were people from all walks of life. Dusk approached and night fell. When the lights were first turned on, the telephone booths by the roadside looked very ordinary. The black dude who was doodling was still thinking about how to occupy the other wall as well. The original phone booth suddenly moved to the left and right as if someone had pressed an unknown button. There was a crashing sound. One of the doors rolled up. Then, a black Lamborghini sports car with bat-shaped wings rushed out from the inside, like the world's most elegant lion, indicating this point. It was about to move. When the car came out, the black buddies all froze and immediately jumped to the side. One must know that the owner of the car was not someone to be trifled with. However, the owner of the carriage had always been mischievous. The more afraid others were, the more they were. The more he deserved her greeting. Chapter 1461. Along with that voice. The car window rolled down automatically. The black people couldn't leave even if they wanted to. After all, the only way out was blocked by the other party. They could only turn their heads and look towards the Lamborghini. The dark black car window rolled down. A youngster with black hair died with a few strands of silver stretched out her arm. There was a black ring on her slender fingers. Her lips were half-curved and she looked very handsome and evil. The most eye-catching thing was the tear mole at the corner of her eye. Everyone else's were black. But hers was black with a tinge of red. For no reason, there was a hint of Buddha's beauty. This was Bojio's real 18 years old. She was clearly a girl, but it was a complete mess of androgynous. This didn't seem to have much to do with her hairstyle. It was the aura that this person exuded. In fact, the black people were very famous in this area. Many of the circulation on the streets were completed by them. In this old city, all the people you could imagine gathered here. Thieves, liars, swindlers. Every one of them was difficult to deal with. After all, these things required skills. The black people loved to group together and had excellent voices. This was related to their bloodline. Don't think that all of them were good or bad. This was related to history. Musical talent and fighting talent were on par. The first three people living here, thieves, liars, and swindlers, would usually take a detour when they saw a black person. But the person who made the black people take a detour was the person in front of her. The weather is really good. Bojio raised her head casually and looked at the night sky that had already darkened. If anyone saw this scene, they would definitely think that it was a classic. Fifth Avenue. Night had just fallen. The elegant youngster lifted his thin lips slightly. It was as if he could see the wind moving. This was Z's 18 years old. She did things her own way, unrestrained and extremely mysterious. It was probably because there was no one to control her or spoil her anymore. Hence, even her eyes didn't have the light from when she was young. Instead, they were dark and heavy. Even though she was smiling, it was easy to think of the devil in the comics. The black people couldn't leave. They were all blocked by her in the corner. Although it was a friendly gesture, how could she tell that the weather was good when the sky was dark? However, this was a daily occurrence. The black people knew that to deal with someone, they had to maintain a straight face. As expected. Bojio wasn't interested anymore. She turned the steering wheel beautifully and headed towards the bustling streets. Only then did the African Americans let out a sigh of relief. Seriously, ever since this guy moved in, they couldn't act like big shots anymore. The route has been modified. Master, where are we going today? Ripples appeared in the system one after another. It was the intelligent little black. However, at this time, it was influenced by its master. His voice was still deep and evil, and it didn't sound like a decent person. Bojio twirled her hair with one hand. It's still early, the nightlife has just started. I'm just taking a stroll. Okay. The smart little black automatically turned on the music and sped up. Soon, it left the car in front of it behind. Bojio glanced over, a faint smile on her face. Bring me the information of today's prey. Yes, my handsome master. Swoosh. The 3D screen changed from a road map to a picture. Chapter 1462. A local who used his power to force his subordinates to have sex with him. After receiving the report, the police quickly filed the case. However, the plaintiff did not appear in court. According to analysis, the plaintiff's lawyer used some tricks. He understood that reputation was very important to Asians, so after talking to the plaintiff, things changed. Smith was acquitted at 3:00 this afternoon, while little Blackie was talking about this. The screen also showed the scene of Smith walking out of the building. A reporter was interviewing him. What do you think about this incident? Smith was a tall man. He was probably finally released from the court. His "I don't know anything" and aggrieved expression changed. He smiled. What do I think? I've been released. That's my biggest opinion on this matter. Some Asians are shy. I was just expressing my admiration, but she misunderstood. Now, she should know that in the words of the Asians, it should be mutual affection. It wasn't forced. Besides, she didn't say anything at the start. After half a month, she couldn't take it anymore. The judge wouldn't listen. There were police officers in charge of the case. They stood there, anger hidden in their eyes. The plaintiff didn't appear in court. They could understand why. It was precisely because he understood why that he punched the wall heavily. The golden-haired man was infuriated. Through the crowd, he looked over here. He had originally wanted to send the Almighty to the police station, but now, his sleeves were rolled up. He looked as though he wanted to beat Smith to death. Smith didn't mind. If he cared about others' criticism, he wouldn't have done such a thing. The situation was clear. Everyone knew what had happened. The natural disadvantage of women made some things hard to explain. Instead, it benefited the rascal. But when the rascal was released, he didn't feel that he was in the wrong. When he faced the camera, he said, "I have some advice for Asians, especially girls. If you can't afford to play, don't play. When Bojio heard this, her lips curved upwards. With a swoosh, she gripped the steering wheel tightly and increased the speed to the maximum. And at the scene at that time, the golden-haired man was so angry that his breathing was hurried. On the other hand, Chin Mo, who was sitting beside him, turned his head. Through the window, his gaze landed on Smith, who was still being interviewed. Listening to the English words drifting into his ears, his slender fingers rhythmically tapped on the car window. That was something he would only do when he was thinking. Her eyes were as cold and indifferent as ever. The blonde man turned his head and wanted to find someone to complain with him. You say, how could such a rascal be released? The plaintiff withdraws the lawsuit. The evidence is insufficient. His tone was very calm, and it sounded a little careless. The blonde man really felt that this detective was a little too cold. I say, Chin, oh no, I mean almighty, don't you have any reaction after hearing such an infuriating thing? Chin Mo glanced over. What do you mean? Emotions, what about your emotions? After the golden-haired man finished speaking, he asked again, are all your experts like this? Chapter 1463. The golden-haired man wanted to say something, but Chin Mo retracted his gaze. Chin Mo retracted his gaze, looking noble and abstinent. Where will this person go in the future? The golden-haired man was confused. Which person? The rascal you mentioned. Chin Mo's voice was still indifferent. The golden-haired man finally felt relieved. Chin, you want to beat him up too, don't you? No. Chin Mo's gaze landed on his face. His aura was noble. Beating this kind of person will dirty my hands. The golden-haired man. This was the first time he felt that words could be used in this way. This was even more satisfying than beating someone up. The golden-haired man controlled the smile on his face. Then, he asked curiously, Chin, why are you asking him where he is going if you don't want to beat him up? Because. When Chin Mo said this, his fingers that were tapping on the car window stopped. He will become Z's target today. Swoosh. A hurried braking sound rang in the air. The golden-haired man turned the car around and stopped by the side of the road. He turned his head and his blue eyes widened. What did you say? I said, he will become Z's target today, Chin Mo repeated casually. His voice was neither fast nor slow. It was a stark contrast to the other person. The golden-haired man didn't know what to ask first. After thinking for a long time, he took out his phone and called the police station. Hello. It's me. Did Z send out a black notice letter today? The person flipped through the information and leaned back. He shrugged. Please, Eric. Would I not tell you if Z sent out a notice letter? I don't need to tell you. The police station will send out a message to inform everyone. When he said this, he didn't realize that there was a black piece of paper at the bottom of the information. Eric nodded. That's right. All right, contact me if there's any situation. After hanging up, he turned his head and said to Chin Mo, Chin, you must have just come to Fifth Avenue and aren't used to the style of handling cases here. Before Z deals with anyone, they will send out a black notice letter in advance. Then, they will lock onto the target at night. The police station didn't receive, the golden-haired man didn't finish his sentence. The phone in his hand rang again. A clear voice came from the other side. Z. Notice letter. Z's notice letter. Eric, how did you know that Z would send out a notice today? The golden-haired man was stunned. He wasn't the one who guessed that Z would send a notice today. Instead, Eric tilted his head and looked at the emotionless handsome face. A certain high school student, he hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Eric couldn't hide his emotions no matter how hard he tried. No wonder the higher-ups wanted him to bring her over in secret. Was it a coincidence? Was he really that awesome? Eric prepared himself and looked at Chin Mo again. That, Chin, How did you know that Smith would be Z's target today? Didn't you just ask me why I have no emotions? Chin Mo placed his phone down and the investigation documents beside it. All my emotions are on how to send this scumbag back to prison. Z should be the same. Before I came, I read the documents you wrote for me. Even though it was useless, it wasn't hard to see Z's style. Chapter 1464. Are you referring to Z's unbridled style? Eric felt the same way too. Did he really treat the police station as his own home? He could come and go as he pleased. Sometimes, he would even give them presents. He even gave them presents for Christmas. He had seen criminals but he had never seen such an arrogant one. Eric would never forget it. The Christmas card that Z left for them. There was only one sentence on it. After eating the candy I gave you, you have to work hard. If not, how are you going to catch me? He was asking for a beating. He was asking for a beating. Chin Mo looked at the unwillingness surging in the eyes of the people beside him. He raised his eyebrows. I'm referring to his style. The people that Z gave to you were all people that should have been in prison but because of loopholes, they couldn't be dealt with. That's right. The golden-haired Eric sighed. That's why he has a very high reputation among the citizens. You don't know this but when he was just released, there was someone who publicly confessed in an interview and insisted on marrying him. She even said that he packed the criminal and the criminal's evidence and sent them to our police station. This action was especially cool. He is cool but what about us? We handle so many cases usually. Why didn't anyone praise us? Chin Mo's indifferent gaze shifted. The golden-haired Eric also realized that he had gone off topic and wanted to change it. He heard that person say, your faces aren't handsome enough. The golden-haired Eric. Can you find a new partner for the Almighty? As for other things, for example, the Christmas gift and card you mentioned. From this, we can see that Z is a person. When Chin Mo said this, his fingers paused. The golden-haired Eric was anxious. What is Z? Chin Mo seemed to have come back to his senses at this moment. Something started to float in his eyes. His voice was still indifferent. A little mischievous. He's not just a little mischievous. In the end, he pulled his hair to express his headache. Fortunately, Z hasn't killed anyone yet. No, that's not right. Z should have killed someone before, but that was a long time ago. The other party was a teacher from a famous school. We only found out about this after investigating. However, the case isn't here. It's in an unknown small state. When we were investigating the pattern of cyber attacks, we found this case. However, the details of the case aren't clear yet. Some people said that the teacher couldn't handle the pressure at that time and lost his footing and fell from the building. When we were investigating, we did some reconstruction. It was indeed the second situation. He lost his footing and fell from the building. However, there's one thing that Z was definitely there at that time. Chin Mo listened and suddenly, his gaze froze. Are you sure this is Z's first network attack? I shouldn't say it's the first network attack. I should say it's his appearance. The golden-haired Eric combined the information he had and said, in the past, there seemed to be some small fights but at that time, it was like, how should I put it? As a detective, I feel that this is a huge turning point for Z, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to change his style from small fights. How should I describe it? In short, it's very mysterious. At this moment, Chin Mo opened his mouth and said accurately, from not knowing what he's doing to knowing what he has to do. Yes. The golden-haired Eric snapped his fingers. That's what I mean. Chin Mo looked up. His voice was very calm. Then investigate. Chapter 1465. Chin Mo's eyes were originally light but at this moment, they darkened. Investigate what that famous teacher has done in the past. When a person has a major change, they will start from the people around them. Find out the relationship between the famous teacher and you will be able to find Z. Eric was speechless for a while before saying, "What kind of investigation method is this?" "Psychology," Chin Mo said slowly. "When a person does something, they can't leave the environment. The murderer's mentality will be reflected at the crime scene. Z's mentality will also be reflected at the scene when she takes action." Eric truly felt that the high school student they invited was a little amazing. But it's too late to go now. Call them and ask them to help with the investigation. When Chin Mo said this, his gaze landed on the street again. "Also, give me a 3D map of Fifth Avenue." Eric exclaimed. "Why do you want to look at the map?" "To find someone." Chin Mo only gave him these 2 words and didn't say anything else. Eric was very busy. He had to contact this person and apply for something else. In the end, he had to drive his car and follow that rascal. After all, Z would kidnap people every time. If this high school student's deduction was correct, then Z would definitely appear near Smith. He had to admit that Eric was much smarter this time. Who said that Z wouldn't appear? Smith was a person. He was born lustful and liked to pick up girls. There was a place where he was locked up for a week. He would definitely go there. Budden Street, a famous nightclub on Fifth Avenue. Smith had always been fond of Asians. Here, it was easy to see Asian faces in the drunken lantern riddles. There were many young people. It was impossible for him not to go. Even if he wanted to wash away his bad luck, he would go for a drink and have a good time. Moreover, it was a festival today. It could be said that before night fell, the curtains to the celebration had already begun. Beside the nightclub was an opera house. It was said that Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet would be performed today. However, the nightclub was in the style of a masquerade party. Hence, everyone was dressed in a different style. It was at a stand on the far right of the nightclub. A black-haired youngster wearing a jacket was shaking a cup with his fingers. His fingertips seemed to be emitting light. Not to mention the black light that was shining from his left ear. Sitting next to the youth was a red-haired female student. Her face was filled with surprise. The young man smiled and said in English, "Guess, how many?" "I can't guess." It was just that anyone could guess it. Every time the young man rolled the dice, they were all consistent. Either all 6 dice were zeros or all 1. "Looks like it's a little difficult for you." Bojio stood up, her clothes fluttering with her movements, revealing a small part of her waist. A black mark flashed across her waist, but no one would notice it in such an occasion. It was a very, very small letter, with the mark of a rose, as if it had bloomed on her snow-white skin. Z, the name was enough to cause panic. But now, it was hidden in the darkness of the night. The youngster casually took a guitar beside her. There were 2 or 3 black rings on her fingers, which often made people subconsciously obscure her gender. He was the only person who was so cool that the entire audience screamed. Everyone said that this resident singer was different from the rest. Chapter 1466. There was a loud screech. It was the roar of an electric guitar. The youngster jumped onto the stage, smiling. Even though she was wearing a black feather mask, the tear mole at the corner of her eye was extremely domineering. The moment Bojio placed her fingers on the guitar, the venue was heated up. But other than this, it was the American police who were patrolling at the entrance. They weren't sure if it was a routine inspection or something else. Bojio, who was standing on the stage, saw it, but she wasn't affected at all. Her black leather jacket and the way she held the microphone looked very handsome. The song swept over. She was singing in Chinese. The bell sounded the signal to return home. In his life, there seemed to be a hint of sadness. The meaning of his black skin was a lifetime of dedication. In the struggle of his skin color, time turned possession into loss. His tired eyes were filled with hope, the rock version of Glorious Years. Music had no boundaries. As long as the atmosphere was stirred up, the people below the stage would naturally wave their hands along. This greatly hindered the police's actions. But they had no choice. After all, they didn't have any evidence. The only thing they could confirm was that Smith had arrived 15 minutes ago. He had even hit on someone and was swaying in the crowd. According to the highest order of the police station, Z would appear here. But there were so many people. Where would Z be? Every police officer who was on duty had a solemn expression. After all, they really wanted to catch that person. Now that they finally had a chance, how could they let it go? However, with such thoughts in their minds, no one looked at the youngster in the dark, holding the microphone. The pair of black eyes were still flashing with light, like a cat playing with a mouse. This was the start of the game. Eric came in at this moment. Behind him was Chin Mo. Chin Mo was still wearing the school uniform he had worn in China. When the people in the nightclub saw him, a hint of surprise flashed across their eyes. But when they remembered that they were in a masquerade dance venue, they more or less accepted it. After all, even though this Asian man was wearing sportswear, his noble aura made the surroundings cold. As for why the foreigners thought that Almighty Chin was wearing sportswear, they could imagine the school uniforms in China. Eric felt that Chin Mo's style wasn't suitable for such a chaotic place. He would definitely have a headache soon. Should he tell the Almighty that there was a difference between the Fifth Avenue and China when it came to playing around? Isn't the music too loud? Eric roared out. Chin Mo had one hand in his pocket. His side profile was calm, so handsome that many people started to turn their heads. However, it was as if he had walked into a classroom. Where's Smith? This was what Chin Mo had instructed Eric in advance. Tell him to keep an eye on Smith. After all, it was a masquerade party. It would be difficult to find Harding when he put on other clothes. Z might take advantage of the chaos to get him away. He didn't really care about Smith. He wanted to know. Z, who was it? That's right, this was the reason why Chin Mo decided to come to Fifth Avenue after reading the information. The army also sent him a message, asking him to return in a few days. Before the past. He just wouldn't give up until he came to Fifth Avenue. After all, the other party was a hacker, right? Chapter 1467. Eric looked at the Almighty's face and felt that he was thinking too much. No matter how loud the music was, the Almighty was still the Almighty. The Almighty was indeed the Almighty. His expression hadn't changed since he entered. At that time, Eric didn't know. There was a type of deduction genius in this world. When they were immersed in their own deductions, it was as though they had entered another world. From a psychological point of view, there were two situations that were the best for thinking. Either it was extremely quiet, or it was extremely noisy. In such an environment, it was better for the brain to function. Of course, the prerequisite for these situations was that one had to be an expert. In actual fact, the moment Chin Mo entered, he was immersed in his own thoughts. In front of everyone. People said that the highest state of solving a case was to imagine yourself as the criminal. If he was Z, what would he do? There was no doubt that the atmosphere here was good. The more people there were, the more they could do something amidst the chaos. It was best to strike when people didn't expect it. But there were cameras here. They had set up spies in advance. How would Z escape? Of course, Z was a hacker. He would definitely intercept the contents of the police's operation. What if the operation was fake? That was right. Chin Mo wouldn't come unprepared. He had already made a distraction. Setting up an operation was one thing. But the ultimate goal was something else. It was a simple logic. If the search was strict, Z would definitely appear in the opposite place. If he couldn't interrupt Z's operation, he would go and intercept her. Give me Smith's location. Chin Mo's handsome face turned slightly when he thought about this. His entire body was abstinent. Eric looked through the crowd and pointed at the Caucasian whose face was flushed red. This kind of scum should be beaten up. Chin Mo replied faintly. Then he closed his eyes and automatically eliminated all the sounds around him. He was prepared to enter the reasoning space again. But when he did that, he realized that when the music, noises, and whistles disappeared, there was only one sound that couldn't be eliminated. A song. Chin Mo opened his eyes. There was light in his eyes. Suddenly, he looked towards the highest stage and frowned. A Chinese song. It's nice, isn't it? This singer is really not bad. He's the first person who dared to sing a Chinese song here, Eric said and automatically hummed a few lines. Chin Mo's voice was low. The glorious years are affecting my thoughts. Affect my thoughts? Eric didn't really understand the world of experts. Chin Mo's gaze dimmed. Chinese is my mother tongue and I often listen to this song. The more familiar something was, the harder it was to eliminate it. Ari still didn't understand. Chin Mo had to find another way. Can I go to the backstage of the nightclub? Yes. Eric showed the things. I specially applied for a search warrant. Chin Mo took another look at the person on the stage. Because of the mask, he couldn't see her face clearly. The only thing that left a deep impression on him was the pair of eyes that were as dark as the night, as well as the glowing mole under her eyes. The more unique something was, the easier it would leave a deep impression. This had a huge impact on Chin Mo. He had to get rid of some things before he could conduct a detailed analysis. But there was a disturbance. Chapter 1468. Just as Chin Mo lowered his lids. He didn't notice that the young man singing on the stage was looking at him wantonly. No, it should be said that Bojio wasn't looking at him at first. She was looking at Eric, who was standing beside him. After all, he was an old friend of hers. However, there was a handsome boy in a school uniform beside her old friend. This caused Bojio, who had never made a mistake in her singing, to pause slightly before continuing with the music. All right. Take this opportunity. It was time for her to take care of today's prey. Bojio held the guitar and swept down from the stage. At this moment, Smith was already mesmerized by the university student he had hooked up with. He just wanted to be taken away as soon as possible. He didn't realize that the silver-haired youngster who had brushed past him would place a tracking device on him. Moreover, the police had actually appeared at this place. It was simply too much for him. Smith wanted to leave even more. He didn't know what he gave the university student to drink. He reached out and pulled the student into his arms. Hence, he really couldn't be blamed. Who asked them to take the bait so easily? Smith carried the student and walked out. In this kind of place, no one would stop you from bringing anyone away. Moreover, he had a guilty conscience, so he would definitely avoid the police's sight. However, he didn't know that leaving this place would be the start of his bad luck. At this moment, in the surveillance room at the backstage of the nightclub, Chin Mo looked at the 8 screens in front of him. His handsome side profile was still the same. Speed up. The person in charge adjusted the speed for him. Chin Mo didn't even move his eyes. As fast as you can. The person in charge paused for a moment before adjusting the speed. Eric's eyes were about to blur. He could only see the people moving so quickly. Anyone's eyes would be able to take it. After watching for less than a second, he couldn't help but rub his eyes. But Chin Mo didn't seem to have any changes. It was as though he could clearly filter and eliminate the images in his mind before confirming them. But this time, nothing. How could it be nothing? Something must have been left behind. Chin Mo reopened his eyes. The so-called deduction was to grasp the important clues. And the more successful the criminal, the more likely he was to be a magician. When you were too focused on something, you would often neglect the most important details. In that case, the opponent's magic trick would be a success. And the people watching the magic show would never understand what had happened in the end. Z didn't need to disguise herself at all. Not a cleaner. He wasn't here for clients either. She didn't even pretend to be a university student trying to trick Smith. Who could Z be? Perhaps he should think in a different direction. For example, the best view. Qin Mo's eyes deepened. Rewind to 30 seconds ago and lock on. Ari had no idea what was going on. One of the scenes paused. It was the young man with the guitar standing on the stage. The young man had a black feather mask on his face. He was wearing a leather jacket and looked extremely handsome. He was playing the guitar well. Eric didn't understand. Why did the Almighty ask them to stop at this image? Another 50 seconds. Qin Mo ignored Eric's gaze, his voice as calm as ever. Eric opened his mouth and was about to speak when he was stunned by the scene displayed on the screen. Chapter 1469. On the screen was the scene of Bojo's encounter with Smith. Ari had never connected the two of them together before. Was it just a bump? After all, the others had bumped into Smith as well. But the Almighty obviously didn't think so. This was because Ari could clearly see that after this scene appeared, the atmosphere in the room changed. The Almighty, who was wearing a high school uniform, had a faint glow in his eyes. This person is most likely Z, what? Eric couldn't accept it at all. His favorite resident singer was Z, who walked them around every day. That person didn't look like a hacker at all. Shouldn't a hacker be wearing a black hat and holding a laptop? Qin, could you have made a mistake? I think. Qin Mo tilted his head, his voice cold. Where is the best angle of view? On the stage. After all, Eric was a policeman. Although his brain wasn't that fast, he was still a policeman. Qin Mo's voice was flat. That's right, on the stage. Not only can he lock onto Smith's position on the stage, but he can also ensure that no one will notice anything amiss when he is hunting. A singer should be looking down from the stage. At the same time, he can clearly see the police's movements and position. If I were Z, I would definitely choose to stand on the stage. Eric opened his mouth again. But he isn't the only one standing on the stage. There are so many people, he fits the bill the best. Qin Mo seemed to be reminded of the pair of eyes he had seen just now. This time, he didn't rely on deduction but intuition. The scene paused again and that person bumped into Smith. That collision seemed casual, and it even seemed like there were too many people to avoid it. In fact, the subconscious inclination of a person's body would reflect their psychology. It wasn't that he couldn't avoid it in time, but there was an 80% chance that he had deliberately bumped into it. He turned to look at Eric and said, "Now, Smith's position." The person on the other side was stunned. Smith, he seems to have left the nightclub. When Eric heard this news, his expression changed abruptly. Then, he rushed out. Qin Mo didn't stop him. Instead, he looked at the youngster with the guitar again. Then, he walked in the opposite direction. Although the small details were a little unexpected. But the final development was still in his hands. Z would choose the best angle and route to take action. If that was the case, he would let the police, who cooperated with him this time, act as his compass. As long as you walk in the opposite direction of the police. He should meet that person soon. Qin Mo couldn't describe how he felt right now. His fingers were a little cold from the wind outside. However, he didn't feel the slightest bit of coldness. Instead, more emotions were brewing in his chest, emotions that he had never shared with anyone before. Or perhaps I shouldn't make such an association. After all, not every hacker could be her. But that Chinese song had changed Qin Mo's state of mind completely. On Fifth Avenue. He wasn't a local. almost certainly. If it was a foreigner, he would never be able to sing that song. So, could it really be her? The little tiger that he had been looking for 13 years but had no idea where she had gone. It was as if the moment he closed his eyes, he would be able to see that person's small figure. She rolled around on his bed. When she was naughty, she hugged him and called out to Momo. When she had a toothache, she covered half of her face with her left hand and didn't forget to get milk for him. She seriously said that she would be obedient and held a small money pot, saying that she wanted to buy him every day. Sometimes, when he was asleep, when he was looking out of the window, that soft little paw would stick to the side of his face and say softly, "Momo, do you want to go back to China? Do you miss your mother? Then think about it carefully, I will accompany you." She acted like an idiot. She thought that he was a girl. She didn't know how to roll up her sleeves and play around with her little keyboard. But she was as warm as a small heater. But suddenly, the small heater was gone. Chin Mo kept thinking. If he had been a little more mature, would the ending have been different? She liked to be naughty. He was raising a child, so it was okay to indulge her. Why did he quarrel with her at that time? The first year, after she disappeared. He was still angry. He was angry that she left just like that, not even telling him anything at all. Didn't she think that that person did something wrong and misunderstood that she went out to play with little William? She just needed to punish him a little. Even if they didn't meet for a month, 3 months, or half a year, it would be fine. Could it not be so long? She would probably never understand what he regretted. What fun things did she see? What delicious snacks did she eat? What friends did she make? Did she grow taller? She should still be as naughty. But he didn't know if there was anyone who would buy her sweets when she wanted to eat sweets. Now that she was so big, she should know how to roll up her sleeves. He couldn't fall every time he took a step. Chin Mo paused in his footsteps, tilting his head as though he was smiling. If Ari saw this scene, she would definitely be shocked speechless. Almighty Chin actually knew how to smile. That genius actually knew how to smile. Chin Mo indeed smiled. Even he didn't know why. Perhaps, whenever he thought of that person, his heart would naturally soften. There was a 90% possibility. Most importantly, the little tiger also had a tear mole under her eye. But it wasn't obvious at that time. When she grew up, she would probably be very beautiful. Achoo. Bo Jiao sneezed lazily as the wind blew against her. Her small mistake on the stage just now was completely negligible. But she didn't know where her old friend found a high school student who was rather handsome. Bo Jiao liked to look at people's faces. She didn't know when she had developed this habit. As she listened to the sirens of the police cars, she lifted her thin lips slightly. Her evil aura was overflowing. She held the knife in her hand and moved it lightly towards Smith's face, who was handcuffed to the electric pole. Ever since Smith came out, he had never expected to encounter such a situation. Now that he was afraid, he couldn't change his ferocity. "Don't you want money? I can give it to you now. Let me go or you won't get anything in the end." She lowered her body. "Do you think I'm a hooligan on the streets? Who told you that I want money? A scumbag like you should stay in prison and not go anywhere. I'll give you a chance now. Do you want to die or tie yourself up and be thrown at the entrance of the police station?" Chapter 1470. Smith was still struggling. Who was so arrogant and dared to touch him? "Don't you know who I am? How dare you say such harsh words?" Bo Jiao laughed. "Smith, I started my business with oil. My company is doing well but my hands aren't clean. For example, when I was dealing with oil, I still had other businesses." When Smith heard the last sentence, his face turned pale and he narrowed his eyes. "You asked me if I knew who you are." Bo Jiao tilted her head. "Now, it's my turn to ask you if you know who I am." Smith wasn't sure of her identity. That was why he didn't understand how this youngster knew about him. Remember this name. Bo-jio raised her hand and sprayed a letter on his chest. She said slowly, Z. When the letter was formed, Smith's eyes widened. Now, he trembled. There wasn't anyone in the entire Fifth Avenue who didn't know about Z. Anyone who was targeted by him wouldn't be able to escape. They would all be sent to prison. However, Smith didn't expect Z to be such a young man. At this moment, he was really afraid. After all, if Z was the one who made a move, he wouldn't even have the chance to hire a lawyer. That was because every time he found the most lethal evidence, it would be enough to send someone to prison for the rest of his life. No matter how sharp the lawyer was, it would be hard for him to speak up in the face of such evidence. Z, please, how did I offend you? Tell me and we can discuss it. Smith begged in a low voice. A thin layer of sweat appeared on his face. Look at me. I can give you the goods. We can split them equally. I can get them for you right now. Bo-jio laughed lightly. Smith, you don't seem to know how I do things. I'll take your goods but you have to go in as well. Smith's eyes turned ruthless. Why do you have to be so ruthless? Z, we are both in the underworld. Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to protect yourself if you go too far? That's my problem. As for why I treat you this way. Bo-jio's eyes were cold. The girls you bullied, regardless of their nationality, you slept with them if you wanted to and sold them if you didn't want to. You even forced them to their deaths. You still haven't learned your lesson after going in. The words you said when you came out are enough for me to kill you. Smith had never expected this to be the reason. After all, Z was also a criminal, right? Why? On behalf of those people, sarcasm, this is really sarcasm. Smith sneered and tried to buy some time for himself to distract the other party. Z, don't you think you're very hypocritical? You're obviously doing bad things and your money doesn't come from a clean source. Why are you still standing up for others? Do you really think those people will treat you as a hero? If that's the case, there wouldn't be so many people who want to catch you in the citizen survey. Your existence makes them feel terrified. No matter what, you're still black. Don't tell me you don't understand this. At this moment, Bo-jio stood up. Chapter 1471. Smith was stunned by the sudden aura. He couldn't say a word. Bo-jio glanced at him. That was the last time she looked at him. I've never been innocent but it's obvious that we're different. Swoosh. The black cloth fell. Bo-jio opened the Lamborghini's door. She adjusted the time sequence manually and patted the car window. Little Blackie, I'm counting on you. No problem, master. The stripes of the smart navigation system formed the same pattern as the sports car that suddenly accelerated. Smith didn't know where he was. It was dark everywhere. Bo-jio turned and stepped onto the motorcycle. She had to lure the police cars away. That was fast. Bo-jio chuckled lightly. She put on her helmet and rushed towards the most crowded place. The battle axe automatically hid in the darkness. As for herself, when she came out, she had already blended into the crowd on the road. The opera performance had already started. A huge pumpkin car appeared in the middle of the road. There was also a white horse wearing a helmet and a magician with a white pigeon on his hand. The festive atmosphere was very strong. It seemed to be welcoming an invisible celebration. Bo-jio had already shaken off the police. She still had a ticket in her hand. She looked just like an ordinary audience waiting to enter the venue. At such a time, shouldn't she let herself enjoy a perfect opera? However, just as she was about to walk forward, suddenly, the surroundings changed. More police cars rushed out. That wasn't all. Even her back was blocked. This had never happened before. When Bo-jio looked up, she could only see a slender figure not far from her. He was still wearing his school uniform. Because of the strong light, she couldn't see his face clearly. Her natural instinct told her that there was some danger. She didn't continue walking forward. She had been careless. She hadn't thought about the high school student beside her old friend Eric. Now, it seemed like he wasn't simple. She wanted to take the opportunity to break through from the right. Hence, her footsteps became casual. At the same time, she turned on the communication device on her left ear. The black earring glowed faintly. It was connected to the signal transmission point that she had long prepared. A guitar in a coffee shop. But now, it could no longer be considered a guitar. It was an invisible notebook. After opening it, it was impossible to tell what it used to look like. Sitting beside it was a young man wearing a pure white sweater. That's right, it was a teenager. The 19-year-old Hoshino, even when he smiled, carried the aura of a jade tree and orchid. He was holding a cup of coffee in his hand. When he saw the screen light up, he pressed his Bluetooth headset. "9 o'clock, there's a person in a school uniform." Bojio glanced over, the surrounding terrain flashing past her mind. "Help me stop him." Hoshino's eyes flashed. Understood. He strolled in the direction of the main road. There was a timer hidden in the sleeve of the sweater. When Bojio moved, she placed something on the clown's body. She looked up and saw the person in the school uniform walking over slowly. If they were smart enough to intercept her, they would definitely find her in the crowd. Therefore, she was not surprised that the figure was walking towards her. Chapter 1472. Hoshino. Bojio glanced over and knocked on her wrist. At that moment, Hoshino pressed the timer on his hand and shouted, "Bomb." Then, he moved to the side and hid in the crowd. His sentence was a bomb. Everyone stopped in their tracks. They even panicked. Eric immediately raised his hand. "Quiet, everyone be quiet." No one could calm down. How could anyone calm down at this moment? The scene became chaotic. If it wasn't for a certain high school student who had grabbed the clown with his left hand when he was passing by, no one would have been able to react. Perhaps they didn't know where the bomb was. When Eric saw this scene, he was so nervous that he was about to break out in sweat. This was the opera house. If something happened here, the casualties would not be small. What should he do? What should he do? Just as Eric was about to get the bomb disposal expert to get close to the clown, suddenly, there was a loud clang. Chin Mo had used a metal rod to knock on the pumpkin car. Just for a moment. His voice was so loud that everyone fell silent for a moment. Everyone looked in his direction. Chin Mo's gaze was as calm as usual. Even his body was the same. It was as though he could feel the cool breeze just by standing there. The bomb is fake. Z is using it to divert everyone's attention. Eric paused. He believed Chin Mo's words. There was no reason not to believe him. After all, ever since the Almighty appeared, he seemed to be able to predict Z's actions. It was as though he knew Z from the start and understood her very well. But in this situation, he couldn't just rely on deduction. What if the bomb was real? The countdown has started. More sweat formed on Eric's forehead. Chin Mo placed the thing in his hand. "Believe me, it isn't a bomb." "Alright, brother. If it isn't a bomb, why don't you hold it yourself?" Eric almost shouted this sentence. Chin Mo's eyes moved slightly. "I have to find her." Her. Because of the grammar, Eric quickly guessed that the person he was looking for was a female. "Oh no, Chin, what kind of situation is this? Are you still thinking about finding a beauty?" Chin Mo pressed his finger. "Look after this fake bomb." "Ah. Wait a minute. What if it really does?" Eric couldn't control himself. "This is a countdown." Chin Mo's voice was calm. How can I fool you without counting down? If it's that person, she's best at being mischievous. However, I believe that regardless of whether Z is her, according to Z's style of doing things, she wouldn't implicate innocent people. Hence, this bomb must be fake. What's more, there was a 90% chance that it was a certain little tiger that he raised. That was because no matter how black the little tiger was, it would not eat people. Hey, Chin! Chin! Eric didn't think that the man would really leave the bomb in his hand. His whole body was shaking. The young man wearing the black feather mask in the crowd cursed softly after hearing the other party's words. He quickened his pace again and even cancelled his usual program to watch the drama. The black trench coat he was wearing seemed to be able to bring out the wind. Everything that had happened today had started from the moment she saw that good-looking high school student. Chapter 1473. Bo-jio thought about it. It didn't stop her from changing. Those who hadn't seen it would probably find it hard to imagine such a scene. Even in the crowd. She could casually grab the hat from the other party's head and put it on her own head. Then, she flipped her trench coat and put it back on. It was another style. A quick disguise wasn't something every hacker could do. As the young lord, Bo-jio seemed to have an innate talent in disguise. Eric was still holding the bomb in his hand. It was about to explode in 5 seconds. He shut his eyes tightly. He could only pray to God now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bang! An explosion rang out from the crowd. There was a sound, but it wasn't the least bit lethal. Instead, there were colorful stripes floating in the air. Ari was scared to the point of losing half of his life. The bomb was still singing. Then, a certain person's voice that was hard to distinguish between a man and a woman could be heard. It was lazy and magnetic. Old friend, happy holidays. Happy my foot. Eric reached out to wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. He had to admit that the Almighty was really amazing. If it had been anyone else, they wouldn't have been able to confirm that it was a fake bomb in such a short period of time. The Almighty really knew Z well. Bo-jio didn't like this feeling. She tried to be mischievous, but it didn't work. She could imagine how she felt. When did such a person appear at the police station? It wasn't fun at all. Bo-jio narrowed her eyes. Her mole flashed and she separated from the crowd. She was almost at the entrance of the alley. Once she entered, little Blackie would be there to receive her. But at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared behind her. Bo-jio reacted quickly. She realized that someone was getting close. Her long legs flew over instinctively. The curve of her body was handsome. There was a sound of wind when she flung her leg out. But the opponent's skills weren't bad either. He reached out to block her attack. His figure was slender and elegant. From this angle, Bo-jio couldn't see the person's face clearly. She could only see the outline. That pair of eyes was too distracting. How could he have such eyes? They were black, but they seemed to be hidden in the galaxy. If it wasn't for the special situation, she would have stopped to admire them. Unfortunately, it wasn't just the wrong time. This person was dangerous. She was in the dark. He is blind. Under the light, she could only see the curve of his chin. He seemed to have said something. She wasn't sure if she had heard wrongly. Come back with me. What? Bo-jio frowned. She wanted to listen more carefully since the surroundings were too noisy. Hoshino's voice came through the earpiece. Z, the police have gone to your place. He couldn't be distracted by beauty anymore. The police HQ was probably enlightened all of a sudden. She actually sent such a person to use a honey trap on her. This was the first time Bo-jio had encountered such a crisis. He turned around again, wanting to kick the man's arm away. She didn't expect that person to move faster than her. His aura was very sharp and noble. Compared to her, he even had an orthodox education. This person wasn't from the police station. A soldier? A thought flashed through his mind. Bojo didn't think too much about it. When she heard the approaching sirens, she spun and tugged on the double buttons of her trench coat. That person seemed to know what she wanted to do. Chapter 1474. It was probably because of their positions. At this moment, Bojo's trench coat was thrown onto the ground. She was only left with the white shirt. Chin Mo wanted to grab her but unexpectedly, because she turned her body, he touched a piece of softness. His fingers paused and he forgot what he was going to do next. Bojo arched a brow. She took advantage of the moment when the other party let his guard down and escaped. She kicked the thing beside her and dashed forward. The Lamborghini with smooth lines drew an arc and a beautiful tail. Bojo reached out and grabbed the car door tightly. Then she turned and sat in the main driver's seat. Speed up. Yes, master. The intelligent system switched from automatic to semi-automatic. The road map appeared. The green one was smooth and the red one was congested. There was also a three-dimensional map of the building. Bojo closed the sunroof and turned the steering wheel with one hand. She made a 180-degree turn and used her cool driving skills to shake off the police cars that were following her. The sky darkened. When Chin Mo paused just now, he understood one thing. It was very likely that he wouldn't be able to stop that person. The information he received was wrong. Z was indeed used to going around alone. But that didn't mean that Z didn't have any helpers. Chin Mo recalled the male voice in the crowd just now. His fingers felt cold from the wind. At this moment, Eric ran over. He was panting heavily. He saw that Chin Mo was the only one left at the end of the long alley. He knew that Z hadn't been caught again. This is already considered very good. At least we didn't have to wait until the news came out the next day. Also, Z's operation this time isn't considered successful. Look at the time. It's different from the notice he gave previously. Everyone knows that Z always means what he says. This time, with you around, he can't be so arrogant. Eric's words weren't comforting. He was thinking that if they did it again, with the Almighty around, they would definitely be able to catch Z. Chin Mo tilted his head and said faintly, Z, it's a girl. MMH? Eric's eyes widened in disbelief. What did you say? Chin Mo glanced up. He didn't repeat himself but he was just so casual. It made him more convincing. Eric was already in a mess. Although the Almighty had previously analyzed that a person wearing a leather jacket and driving a motorcycle wasn't necessarily a guy. But that was Z. No matter what. He was the king of hackers who fascinated the citizens of Fifth Avenue. It was actually a girl. He was right. There were indeed powerful female hackers. But under normal circumstances, they were very cute and innocent, so no one would suspect them. Moreover, many people knew that their results could be seen on the hacker rankings. Only Z. This person had never achieved anything. However, he had a unique position in the hacker world. It seemed impossible to surpass. Eric had sent people to investigate, but they couldn't find anything. The only result he got was that young master. The person who was known as the young master should be a man, right? Moreover, Z's style of doing things and the figure in the trench coat that she occasionally revealed were all so handsome. It didn't look like a girl at all. This was too important. Eric had to confirm. Chin, how are you so sure that Z is a girl? Chapter 1475. Bojo, who was driving the Lamborghini through the traffic, seemed a little different from before. The navigation system adjusted automatically, reflecting her emotions. Master, through the seat cushion, it is telling me that your heartbeat isn't right. Did you run too fast just now? It had to be said that Little Black's question came at the wrong time. This was the first time Bojio's chest was touched by someone, and it was a stranger. Something seemed strange. She reached out and tugged her collar, maintaining her suave and devilish demeanor. Shut up. Little Blackie didn't understand. What was wrong with it being concerned about its master? Bojio's face was still warm. She wound down the car window and reached out. Her black hair was blown into a mess. Gradually, the androgynous face became clearer under the moonlight. In order to not leave any traces, she had to remove the black feather mask on her face. There weren't any police cars around. This meant that it was absolutely safe. But Bojio didn't let her guard down. She drove the car to the black and blue phone booth. Then she pressed the black watch on her wrist. There was a loud crash. The shape of the phone booth changed, forming a circular arch. Bojio drove the car in. There was a person sitting there, holding a cup of coffee in his hands. He was wearing a pure white sweater. He tilted his head, looking at the moonlight outside. His figure was tall and slender, his side profile fair and handsome. When he heard the sound, he glanced over. "You're back." "I almost couldn't make it back." Bojio held onto the car door with both hands and jumped out. Her landing posture was suave. When she turned back to look at him, her eyes lit up. "This group of people knows how to use the honey trap on me. How despicable, don't you think so, Hoshino?" Hoshino chuckled when he heard that. He thought of the elegant figure he saw on the street before. "You like that type?" It's alright, pure." Bojio took a can of chocolate milk and held it in her mouth. Her eyes were dark. "It's a pity I couldn't see his face clearly." Hoshino took a sip of coffee. "He doesn't have much to do with the purity you speak of. Even if the person was wearing a school uniform, as long as he stood there, he would give off an oppressive feeling." How unfathomable was he? Regarding the fact that Z had used the word pure on him, Lin Sanjiu was shocked. Hoshino was just listening. After all, only Z would think that way. But the more Bojio thought about it, the more she felt that she was right. After finishing a can of milk, she threw it aside casually. It was a handsome move. Then she glanced back. "This is the first time someone intercepted me like this." Hoshino understood. "I will investigate his identity." "Indeed, we should investigate. Where did the police find such a person? His calculation skills are so strong, even his skills." Bojio paused, popping a chocolate bean into her mouth. "A Chinese soldier, seems like it won't be easy to investigate." When Hoshino heard that, his fingers paused. "You've fought before?" Bojio leaned back casually. Hoshino frowned. "Are you hurt anywhere?" "I'm not hurt, but..." Bojio paused and smiled. "It's nothing, let's fight again and see who he is." Chapter 1476. Bojio wanted to investigate Qin Mo wanted to find Z even more. Even though the lingering sensation on his fingers affected Almighty Qin's thoughts. But something in his nature hadn't changed. From 90% to 99%, he could confirm that it was that person. In the bathroom, Qin Mo looked at his palm. His thoughts were still wandering, but it didn't affect his calculations. He could confirm that his little tiger had grown up. He couldn't help but smile. When he realized what he was thinking about. Qin Mo's ears turned red. In the end, he laughed softly. Eric stood outside, holding the latest information. He wanted to show it to the Almighty. Perhaps, it would give him some inspiration. The environment back then wasn't like now. Alright, this had nothing to do with the environment. It was the hotel that Eric found. The soundproofing wasn't good. Eric couldn't understand. Could it be that people with high intelligence were different from them? Their way of relieving stress was to be happy in the bathroom? What was the Almighty so happy about? Just as Eric was about to make a guess, the bathroom door opened. Chin Mo walked out. There was a white towel on his black hair. The tip of his hair was still dripping water. His smooth mermaid lines were smooth. Even Eric, a man, was stunned. Wait a minute. Wasn't the Almighty a high school student? When he wore his school uniform, he looked fair and cold. He looked like a harmless prince. Why did he look like a different person without his school uniform? He had to admit that the school uniform in China was a good thing. After wearing it, it gave off a different feeling. As for which feeling it was up to the person who wore it. But Chin Mo was different from others. If there was anything that had changed, it would probably be the innate aura of a king. Now, it was completely released. Eric was shocked by the aura and didn't know what to do. Chin Mo threw the towel aside. He casually grabbed a black t-shirt and wore it. His gaze was deep. What did you find? Eric passed the information in his hands over. Chin Mo's slender and fair fingers flipped through the information quickly. His elegant and handsome side profile wasn't affected by the water droplets. Once again, Eric witnessed what it meant to read 10 lines at a glance. Chin Mo didn't just read quickly. More importantly, he could remember everything after reading it. His light-colored eyes seemed to be able to reflect those words. From the perspective of inference. Add in the areas where the criminal often committed the crime and some of the more subtle areas of activity. He would be able to calculate where the other party lived. If he were her. No, that's not right. He could not empathize with her. According to a certain someone's character of being mischievous in everything. It was possible that she had deliberately left some traces behind. Therefore, he had to distinguish which marks were real and which marks were left behind after being naughty. With this in mind, Chin Mo flipped through the stack of documents again. It was obvious that this time, what he saw was targeted. Fine discrimination and curve analysis. Many people say that reasoning is based on psychology. There was nothing wrong with that. However, advanced reasoning would definitely include mathematical calculations. Anyone who had seen the dedication of Suspect X would know that Stone God was the best example. Geniuses were often lonely. Not many people knew that mathematics was not that simple. Chapter 1477. It was as though a 3D map appeared in his mind. Suddenly, Chin Mo opened his eyes. His gaze landed on the map of Fifth Avenue. His eyes lit up. I found it. MMH? Eric had never seen the Almighty like this. Chin Mo's voice was still calm. The gray area of the entire street, the gathering place of all the underground workers, Seoul Return Street. Seoul Return Street was what the internet called it. Of course, this was the Chinese translation. Make such an analogy. It referred to the boundary between light and darkness. You would be able to see people from any industry there. Eric frowned. Would Z live in such a place? The conditions aren't good. Z should be quite rich. Someone calculated Z's assets previously. Of course she was rich. Every person that Z sent to prison would be taken over. Z would take over all of their assets. Hence, what that scumbag said was right. Z's money wasn't clean. However, there was something strange. Some people didn't live in poverty and would receive a sum of money instead. Z never gave money to the beggars on the streets. Eric felt that he still couldn't understand Z's thinking. Hence, he asked Chin Mo about this. Chin Mo glanced at him. There's nothing hard to understand. The money belongs to her. She can give it to whoever she wants. What I mean is, why doesn't Z give money to the beggars on the streets? He didn't understand. Chin Mo's voice was calm. Homeless people with 4 limbs. Most of them are middle-aged. Funding is for those in need and those who know how to be grateful. Those who don't know how to be grateful will complain if you give them something for nothing. This is funding, not raising a demon. Those who don't have money aren't necessarily weak. There are also those who lie on the ground and pretend to be beggars. They take other people's things for granted. This has nothing to do with education, age, or background. Hence, funding to families won't be based on rich or poor. Instead, it depends on whether the other party is worthy or needy. These matters should be handled by another person. Another person? Eric looked up. You mean Z isn't acting alone? Chin Mo analyzed deeply. She must be acting alone. The impression Z gives off is that she acts alone. Even she what? Eric didn't understand why the Almighty didn't continue. However, as he stood in front of the large French window, his handsome face, which was accompanied by the starlight, had some other emotions. Chin Mo didn't finish his sentence. She was destined to have no close friends around her. He wanted to be a good Z. He had to learn to disguise himself first. He had to keep his distance from everyone so that he wouldn't be noticed. Because once you get too familiar with someone, you'll definitely lose your mind. Emotions come into being. As the young master of hackers, he couldn't use his emotions to do things. With great power came great responsibility. Because if they were not careful, they would implicate the people around them. Chin Mo lifted his head, his gaze landing on the moving cars. His heart ached. The things he was thinking about. This did not happen to his little tiger. Ever since the Bo family had moved, no one had asked her if she wanted to eat sweets. Just thinking about it. Chin Mo's side profile melted into the shadows. This made Ari a little confused. At this moment, Eric's phone rang. The caller ID was an unknown number. Chapter 1478. All of a sudden, Eric's eyes widened. His right hand froze. His first reaction was, "Why do you have my number? Is it strange that I can even find the number of the people in the police station?" Bo Jio sat on the chair. She wore her earphones on her messy hair. You guys are really smart now. You actually learned how to use the honey trap on me. Heh. But Eric, I'm afraid even you haven't figured out the other party's background. Eric's expression was probably too special. Chin Mo, who was standing by the window, retracted his gaze and placed it on his face. Eric wanted to say something but the person on the other end laughed again. The honey trap is not bad. I will look for him. The moment he finished speaking, the sound of the phone being cut was heard. Next, Eric met the Almighty's cold gaze. He automatically said, "It's C." In that instant, Chin Mo lowered his gaze. It was as though there were waves crashing. Even though he knew that the other party was probably using an internet phone and couldn't be traced, he still didn't want to give up. In the end, his fingers gripped the phone. His back view seemed a little lonely. This was even more so after he reached Seoul Return Street. Because the clues were broken. Admittedly, no matter how accurate the inference was, it didn't seem to be of much use on Z. Or rather, after 3 days of investigation, Chin Mo had a clear feeling that she was no longer here. Chin Mo's feeling was right. Bo Jio was indeed no longer here. She had grown so big. After becoming the young lord of the hackers, Bo Jio knew what she had to do. It was better to try less things that she was interested in. Especially those good-looking geniuses. The small towns in Europe were all very peaceful. Even though there was an ancient castle there. The ancient castle seemed to have some history. In the courtyard, the butler dressed in a tuxedo was trimming the branches and leaves of the trees. He had a snow-white beard but his face gave off a gentlemanly charm. Occasionally, he would glance at the pocket watch in his hand. Young lord came back at night. Just like every other time. He wouldn't come back often unless it was on this day. March 13th. The true identity of the hackers was discovered once again. After Master left, he never came back. Ever since that day, young lord was different. The butler lifted his eyes and looked at the figure standing under the tree. Other than him, no one knew what the young master was thinking. Because she was handing out candy to the kids at the ranch. Only when young master was around would the children come over. The young master sat there with his head raised. No one knew if he was looking at the sky or something else. A child asked, "Bo, why do you always like to bring us sweets?" Bo-jo didn't reply. She smiled devilishly. This question is more complicated. It's probably because I want someone to carry a piece of candy with them one day. Do you have it with you? The children's eyes were wide open, as clear and beautiful as the blue sea and sky. Bo-jo replied, still smiling. It would be even more blissful if I could just take it out from my pocket. Wow! The children were also looking forward to it, and their saliva was swirling. Back then, she had never expected her wish to come true. So there really was such a person in this world. Regardless of whether he was wearing a combat uniform or a military uniform, or even camouflage during training. Chapter 1479. The most regretful thing in this world was missing out. Because she didn't trust anyone anymore, Bo-jo hid herself. But at the same time, Chin-mo didn't find any more information about Z. It was as if she had evaporated overnight. Some of the townsfolk were even wondering if Z had ever existed. Chin-mo had thought of looking for clues. Most of the clues were fake, but he didn't give up. He dug bit by bit. But he had never thought about it. He cared too much about what happened to a person. Something else would happen. This was probably what people called the butterfly effect. Because the person who placed his attention on him would definitely think of a perfect plan. Starting from what he cared about would achieve the best effect. Hence, a plan slowly unfolded. First, Fan Jia came. Everyone knew what had happened. Her thoughts didn't come to fruition. Chin-mo was still the same Chin-mo. But this was the first step of the hypnosis. It was also the first step for the other party to confirm that Z was able to break through Chin-mo. No matter what Chin-mo did, there would be more in the future. Hence, a month later. At the border crossing, news about Z appeared again. Bo-jo went there. Chin-mo went there too. But Bo-jo went first. And Chin-mo went after she left. Someone gave Bo-jo a clue about Mr. Bo. Hence, she came over and had some impulsive thoughts. She probably didn't expect that the video of her jumping into the sea would be recorded and edited again. She just had to wait for that person to come. To the other party. To Chin-mo, the difficulty of carrying out the mission was very high. Compared to using weapons, psychological warfare was the key. When he sneaked into the location, he understood what he would encounter this time. Rescuing the hostages was the first task. But he didn't know who to rescue. Or rather, he couldn't differentiate the level of hypnosis. That mission was as described previously. No one wanted to carry it out. It wasn't just complicated. It would defeat people. At the start, Chin-mo hid very well. After all, he knew what the other party wanted to do. Then, he saw the search information left on the computer. Then, he understood that these people were also looking for the person he was looking for. And they seemed to have gotten the answer. Even some clues were from when he was at Fifth Avenue. Because he had investigated too deeply, they were able to conclude that Z wasn't a man but a woman. These were all based on his previous analysis. The other party even noticed this. Mr. Bo making use of Mr. Bo's information would attract Z's attention. If Z was her, she would definitely come here. After Chin-mo realized this, he couldn't devote all his attention to the next mission. Even if he knew that he was going to face someone who could plant a seed in his heart. Once the seed was planted, it would take root and sprout. If he had a psychological problem, he shouldn't have continued. Under such circumstances, there was no way he could defeat his opponent. Chin Mo leaned against the wall. His black hair was still messy. No matter what logic told him, it wouldn't work. But at that point, he didn't have much time to think. The only thing he could think of was that the information he had obtained from the fifth path had allowed the other party to find clues about her. It was probably the same mentality. In the end, everything was over. When Chin Mo saw the video, he was thinking while he was soaking in the river. He did not reach out to stop her. It was he who did not reach out to hold her back. It was all because of him. Chapter 1480. When they found Chin Mo, he was sitting on the ground with an obvious injury on his wrist. The mission was completed. He had successfully killed the leader of the enemy. But that day, Chin Mo's fever didn't subside. Hence, a portion of the members had escaped. Fan Jia had been taken away by Kawang. To him, his dead student had done a perfect job. It wasn't easy to plant a seed in Chin Mo's heart. At the same time, the fact that he had lost his beloved student made his gaze turn cold. Chin Mo had woken up on the plane. When he had woken up, he seemed normal, but some of his memories seemed to have disappeared. Were all people like this? The more one cared, the more likely it was to form an inner demon. No matter how old one grew, they couldn't be invincible because they would always care about what they cared about. At first, no one noticed Chin Mo's state. Even movie Queen was the same. She was just worried about the injury on her son's wrist. Gradually, Chin Mo seemed to have forgotten a lot of things. Including why he hadn't taken a look at the photo of him when he had met the Yin family. Or perhaps, he had forgotten the reason he had named his cat Princess. It was because someone had once treated him as a princess. He had forgotten all of this. Old Master N was the one with the deepest senses. But the doctor had advised him not to touch the things hidden in his heart. If he did so, his mental state would collapse quickly. This was especially true for a profiler like Chin Mo. If he hadn't been so smart or had such a strong deductive ability, perhaps he wouldn't have ended up like this. But because he understood it too well, he couldn't walk out of it. The only thing old Master N could find that was similar to when he had been young was the amulet hanging around his neck. As for the rest, there was nothing else. He had even forgotten why he wanted to play games. There wasn't anything bad about this. But every time old Master N thought about it, he would feel terrible. When Bojio returned to Fifth Avenue, she realized that the person who had used the honey trap on her wasn't here anymore. That was all she could understand. She didn't know that someone had gone through so much to find her. Smith was right. Z's existence. It wasn't allowed. In this world, there was a balance between them. If someone appeared and broke this balance, they were destined to reach the end. After Kawang took over the organization, he kept quiet for a period of time. Then he started to follow the previous clues and sift through them bit by bit. In the end, he found the hacker's breakthrough point. The biggest taboo for a hacker is to lose their privacy. It wasn't as if such a method had never been used before. Because he cared too much. When the method that destroyed her family appeared once again, that was why Bojio burrowed in. She didn't even think about what the other party wanted. When she arrived at the location, that was the beginning of everything. Kawang's analysis of psychology. It was impossible for others to guard against. He knew how to do one thing in several steps. That was why people fell into it. In fact, people who loved candy always had a naive side hidden in their hearts. Kawang was clear. On the other hand, Bojio wasn't sure what she thought might not be as comprehensive as she thought. Hence, a little girl holding a balloon became Z's most fatal blow. Many people had told her not to turn completely black. It turned out that there were no weaknesses and no pain when it was completely black. It was a street that no one went to look at, even though there were many people coming and going. No one saw the bleeding wound under the windbreaker she was wearing. Bojo even thought that everything was finally over. All the loneliness that no one understood. She didn't need to continue. This way, she could go and see her parents. Chapter 1481. But there was such a magical thing in the world. It was also at that moment. The Buddhist words in the amulet emitted a faint light for some reason. Maybe there really was such a person. Even if he forgot you, didn't remember your appearance, didn't remember your voice, and didn't even remember your name. But when he looked into your eyes again, he could still touch your soul. What you were like. No matter who said it, it couldn't be shaken. You just stood there. At the border of black and white. Even if you were muddle-headed and there wasn't a single clean spot on your body, he would still treat you differently. Because he understood you more than he understood himself. Because he loved you more than himself. He had been standing there, cleaner than everyone else. He was like a bright lamp, standing at the most obvious place. Not for any reason. But because, after searching for so many years, he still lost you. If that was the case, could you find me? A little more time passed. Until that pair of eyes that were as dark as the night opened again on September 28th. A devilish smile appeared on his handsome face. A Z imprint appeared on a completely different body. The gears of fate began to spin again. Z was back. Similarly, the little tiger that belonged to him was back too. It didn't matter if he forgot what light was. It didn't matter if he wanted to become completely black. There was someone who had always been here, using his unique method to wait for the person in his hands. Hamburgers should be paired with cola. That's better. Chin Mo glanced down and helped her roll up her sleeves. Chin Mo glanced down and helped her roll up her sleeves. My mom. Chin Mo glanced down and helped her roll up her sleeves. Bojo replied, oh. She didn't know what she was thinking. Anyway, she was happy with something in her heart. Oh, Bojo replied. He didn't know what she was thinking, but she was happy to have something in her heart. He should have said it long ago. She trusted Grandfather Butler's etiquette skills. He should have said it long ago. She trusted Grandfather Butler's etiquette skills. Now, only little Princess Mo didn't know about this. This way, she could naturally bring him to the proposal venue. Then, she would very romantically show him what she had prepared. Everything was perfect. This was simply one of the classic tricks used by an overbearing CEO to woo his little secretary. There was no pressure for her at all. Bojo smiled devilishly. Follow me somewhere. Chin Mo, who already knew, arched a brow. Where? Chin Group Club. After Bojo finished eating, she tilted her head lazily. That isn't a bad spot. I heard Zhao Sanpang and the others are doing an interview at the television station opposite today. Chin Mo wanted to ask what this had to do with his proposal. But if he asked, it would be less interesting. He replied calmly with his side profile. Bojo was still thinking about the surprise she would give little Princess Chin later. It would definitely be enough for him to marry her. The more he thought about it, the more obvious his smile became. There is such a thing as being alone and enjoying oneself. Bojo had never done it before. Now that his arm was placed over the window, his eyes were looking out of the window. It was a very handsome posture. That face that was reflected in the window was full of moles and a wanton smile. He was like a child who had finally gotten candy. Of course, he wanted to be happy for a while. Chin Mo didn't want to laugh, but seeing her like this, he couldn't help but ask, are you that happy? Ah. Really? Bojo's devilish smile was still there. You must have eaten something you like. Chin Mo freed a hand and placed it on her head. Idiot. Chapter 1482. 8:30 p.m. It wasn't early or late. The overtime workers hadn't even returned home. Especially in a city like Jiang City that didn't sleep. Some of them had just arrived at their seats. Some of them were playing with their children in the plaza. Bojio felt that as a domineering CEO, the proposal couldn't be kept a low profile. That was why she had chosen such a time point. Especially when she heard that the main members of Xiangnan were going to be interviewed. She felt that this was a good opportunity. Since she had prepared beforehand, she decided to do it now. Hence, she turned her attention to the Qin Group's building. Under normal circumstances, it would be easy for her to hack into a company's network. But this time, she paid for it. After all, she was going to propose. She transferred a sum of money to the Qin Group in advance and then carried out a small hack. It was all to obtain the control of the building. It had to be said that the person who designed the building had good foresight. There was a corresponding light on each layer of glass. Even at night, it would be easy to see. If that was the case, it would be easy for a hacker to do something. As long as she learned how to control the circuit, everything wouldn't be a problem. Bojio stood there, wearing Qin Mo's jacket. It was a dark-colored trench coat, looking exceptionally handsome. Qin Mo watched as a certain someone raised her hand and was about to climb over the wall. He pulled her back, his gaze calm. "What are you doing? You're so short." Bojio smiled brightly. With a push of one hand, she connected the small laptop outside to the prepared USB flash drive. Qin Mo swept her a glance, asking even though he knew the answer, "What are you doing?" "A lighter." Bojio pointed to the side, a silver lighter lying in her palm. If it had been any other time, with Qin Mo's sharp tongue, he would have exposed her long ago. She had hidden the lighter in her sleeves, how could he not see it? But it all depended on her. He would let her do whatever she wanted. Bojio realized that little Princess Mo was exceptionally easy to talk to today. She had to seize the opportunity to propose. "Brother Mo, wait here for a while." Bojio ran towards the left. She was wearing a dark-colored trench coat, her silver hair a little messy. Qin Mo watched as a certain someone squatted down. It was probably her first time doing such a thing and she wasn't very familiar with it. She tilted her head, her face serious as though she was lighting something up. Then, she raised her head, tilted her eyes, and smiled brightly at him. At that moment, smoke rose. The lights of the city seemed to be reflected in her black eyes. Qin Mo understood. This person is putting her favorite things in front of you to please you. Her face was still stained with the dust that she had just rubbed against, and there was even some axe chi on her body. But that did not change the way she looked in his eyes. If I had to describe it. She walked through thousands of galaxies, stepped on the dust on the ground, and stopped in front of you with her hands stained with dirty things. What you can feel is not how dirty she is. Instead, she was little Bojio. She was his. Qin Mo reached out to pull her into his arms. Who would have thought that at this time, the highlight of the show would truly come? Behind her, the entire Qin Corporation's building suddenly lit up. Only one row of boxes was darkened. Between the light and the dark, only 6 words were formed. Chapter 1483. Qin Mo, marry me. Since it was a lighting image, with the help of fireworks, the words weren't unchanging. The 6 words were not unchanging. Instead, they were like a slideshow, like the petals of a rose that had bloomed and gathered together. It was as though a small game had been designed on the surface of the building. The children in the square lifted their heads, their eyes wide as they asked curiously, "Mommy, what is that?" "That." The mother paused, momentarily forgetting to reply, her eyes still filled with shock. Not to mention the couple strolling by the side. The girl was envious, reaching out to cover her lips, sighing. "If there was a guy who treated me like that, I would definitely marry him." With that, She tilted her head, sweeping a glance at her boyfriend. The boy held the candied hawthorn in his hands. His first reaction was, F***ck, which brother came up with this, wasting so much time and effort, how could he live? But after half a second, he realized a problem. Wifey, go away, who's your wifey? The girl narrowed her eyes, unhappy. No, I mean, think about it, just think about it, which girl is called Chin Mo? The boy argued. The girl stilled. She really hadn't thought about it. The words didn't disappear. Half a second later, it became brighter, so beautiful it was hard to ignore. Opposite the building was the interview stage. There were obviously people there. The Xiangnan team came out of the interview room. Someone was chatting with the manager. Xiangnan's manager was different from Supreme Alliance's. He was a middle-aged man who would smile at anything, like a Maitreya Buddha. Zhao Sanpang had been listening to their chat, but he couldn't sit still. He stretched his neck, wanting to ask when his captain was leaving. His fans were still waiting for him to go on air. Who would have thought that when he glanced to the side, he would see the 6 glittering words on the other side, as if they were free. With a loud bang, he straightened his back. The interviewer looked over at him. Even the manager signaled for him to be quiet. Zhao Sanpang scratched his head, whipping out his phone to send a message in the WeChat group, tagging 2 people. You guys did it on purpose. Little Spade. Come out. Come out. Come out. The main character didn't come out, so the others all sent a yawning emoji. Someone even asked with concern, were you tortured again? Zhao Sanpang added, they're from the pedestrian walkway. Open the window and look outside. In less than a second, WeChat exploded. F***ck. Holy shit. Let me digest first. I feel that Xiangnan's impact is greater. They are doing an interview opposite. I won't say anything else. I'm so handsome, yet no one has proposed to me. The moment the phone vibrated, Beauty Luo and Captain Xiao saw the message and looked over. With that, the interviewer stopped talking. After all, Zhao Sanpang's absent-mindedness was so obvious. Even the other 2 followed the interviewer's gaze and looked over. That interviewer was stunned. Propose to young Master Qin. Propose? Propose? He was probably not mistaken. Who could it be? So powerful. Chapter 1484. Even Zhao Sanpang had said so. She could imagine the scene in the WeChat group. Basically, she had figured out the routine. This was a public display of affection. There was nothing else. Bo Jiao acknowledged this point. In the past, they could only show affection in front of the car. Now, it was different. They could declare their sovereignty. But speaking of which, Bo Jiao wasn't sure. From the start, she knew that a family like the Qin group wouldn't allow someone to marry into their family. In addition, little Princess Qin's personality. Bo Jiao thought about this and wanted to say something. Just then, a voice rang in her ears. Very beautiful. So, should she agree or not? Bo Jiao wanted to know. However, she saw him reach out his hand, and his fingertips brushed across her face as if he was wiping something dirty for her. The touch was slightly cold, but strangely comfortable. Let's go. That was it. Bo Jiao looked at the hand that was holding her. The joints were distinct, fair and slender. It was indeed beautiful. But, should she agree or not? After getting into the car, Bo Jiao felt that she had to end things quickly. She placed one hand over, an unknown emotion in her eyes. She was about to speak. Suddenly, a kiss landed on her lips. Bo Jiao paused. Qin Mo decided to stay in this position, pulling her into his arms. His gaze was noble. Not cold. It's all right. That wasn't the main point. Bo Jiao really didn't manage to finish it in one go. How should she put it? Just, Chin Mo interrupted her, his voice slow. Didn't I already give you my household register? MMH? Bo Jiu arched a brow. Chin Mo pushed her hair aside. I've been yours for a long time. Are you the only one who realized this? Bo Jiu's eyes lit up. Her handsome face was a little arrogant. That's not it. I just want to make our relationship more legal. She wasn't a person who followed the rules. But being with little Princess Chin was the only time she wanted to follow the rules. It will be legal. Chin Mo had never been so soft-hearted before. The person in his arms was always like this. She looked like a fox that could leave any time, but in reality, she was more sentimental than anyone else. Chin Mo was glad that he had known since he was young that he had to monopolize such a person. Because there was such a person. It was like a black pearl covered with dust. It looked dark, but once it was placed in the night, it was bright and transparent. We'll get married when you're of age. Chin Mo chuckled lightly, his voice resonating in her heart. I'll marry into the Bo family. What did this sentence mean? Bo Jiu was very clear. If they had children in the future, their surname would only be Bo, not Chin. Moreover, the family of hackers needed to be passed down. This meant that he couldn't join the army, which was against all the rules of the Chin family. What about the Chin family? Bo Jiu was elated, so elated that she paused slightly when she mentioned the most important question. Your mother is a fan of movie Queen and if you want to be the heir of the Chin family, you can have another child with her while you're still young, but there's one thing, what is it? Bo Jiu arched a brow. Chapter 1485. Everyone in the world knew that her greatest wish was to bring Qin Xiaoma home and raise him. Now, it had come true. Bo Jiu was overjoyed. MMH, I'll take care of you. Will you follow me back to Fifth Avenue? Sure. Chin Mo smiled. Once I get into university, you can go wherever you want. Bo Jiu's eyes lit up. There are so many places I want to go, Kunlun, Mount Everest, Kukushili and other places, one place a year. Chin Mo pinched her face. As long as a certain someone isn't so mischievous. Bo Jiu smiled suavely. I've always been obedient in front of a beauty. Chin Mo arched a brow. Beauty? This person never seemed to know who the real beauty was. Bo Jiu wanted to say something since she was too happy. But before she could open her mouth, her breath was stolen. This kiss was different from the previous one. It was domineering and unstoppable. The slightly cold lips weren't gentle anymore. Instead, they seemed to be stealing all her thoughts. Even the tip of her tongue had a lingering peppermint fragrance. He only released her when her entire body was numb. He freed one hand and sent a WeChat message. The gist of it was basically, you guys are interrupting me from agreeing to a certain someone's proposal. Hearing the slightly cold voice, Bo Jiu realized that a few buttons on her shirt had been unbuttoned. From a certain perspective, it was indeed an interruption. He also glanced at her, reached out his hand, and fastened the buttons of her shirt one by one. His gaze was very deep. The phone exploded. One could imagine the situation in the WeChat group. Zhao Sanpang was the first to speak. Kick him out of the group. Agree. Agree +1. But it was useless. Chin Mo asked, are you jealous? He pulled the hatred towards him to the highest level. But that wasn't the end. Chin Mo continued, Hoshino should be in this group too, I don't have to inform him about my proposal. Zhao Sanpang, you finally did something a support should do. Zhao Sanpang, Hoshino, you see Xin, every team member felt as though they had witnessed Chin Mo's shamelessness once again. Regarding this point, Bo Jiu felt that the Almighty was playing tricks on her. Just one sentence, after she entered university. It had been almost a month. Everyone could basically see that the extremely handsome man was holding a book in his hand wherever he went. There was also a time when the blonde from second middle school saw it and was completely shocked. One had to know that although the results of the experts were good, it was really not like them to love learning so much. After all, the two of them had done frog jumps together. This was something only those who skipped class were qualified to do. Idol, you've changed. The yellow hair was very pained. You've really changed. Bojio smiled with the green foxtail in her mouth. What do you know? I'm preparing to marry the Almighty. After the Asian Cup, the entire Supreme Alliance was on holiday. There are only a few interviews to be done. She didn't want to show her face. It was a long rest. Of course, she would take this opportunity to study hard. However, no matter how strong the Supreme Alliance was or how much glory they had won, they would never be able to win. There were still many people who disliked Spade Z. Chapter 1486. Supreme Alliance did have its drawbacks. But it wasn't a coincidence. Every team would have its own problems when they reached their peak. It was the same for Supreme Alliance. They treated every match as though it was their last. It wasn't just passion, it was also because Supreme Alliance's lifespan wasn't that long. Not to mention Yin Wuyao's age. Moreover, most esports players were 18 or 19 years old. After 24 years old, their condition would deteriorate day by day. It sounded cruel, but it was the most realistic truth. That also meant that Supreme Alliance was aging. It wasn't just Yin Wuyao, there was also Lin Feng, Yun Hu, and even Qin Mo. They had at most 2 years left in their professional esports career. Moreover, before the Asian Cup, Lin Feng and Yun Hu had the thought of retiring. After the Lin family collapsed, they relied on the company to support them. Lin Feng looked innocent, but in reality, he was more responsible than anyone else. In the past, when the Lin family was doing well, he didn't have to care about anything and just be the young master of the courtyard. But now, it was different. Lin Feng could sense it from the way he treated others. But on the surface, he didn't care. In reality, Lin Feng wouldn't ignore the responsibility just because he was happy in the competition. Including after Supreme Alliance won the Asian Cup, he immediately started running projects outside. Yun Hu asked him out several times. Of course, he didn't ask him out alone. He asked the people in the courtyard to gather together. Lin Feng rejected him several times because he was busy. The people standing beside Yun Hu probably noticed something. They were still in the tea house. One of them laughed. Little boss Lin is really busy now. How about this, I'll make a call and talk to him about our previous collaboration. With that, he made the call in front of Yun Hu. His motive was to make Yun Hu happy. Yun Hu held the teacup in his hand and didn't look at him. But that person understood that he couldn't hold it in anymore. He wanted to meet someone too much. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given him face. Lin Feng didn't pick up quickly. When his voice traveled over, it sounded like the wind. Jia, what's wrong? Nothing much, I'm just calling you out for a gathering. Say, we grew up in the same yard, and it's been a long time since we last met. You said that you need to take care of your feathers during the competition, and now that you're on vacation, there's nothing wrong with hanging out a little longer. Song Jiahe was eloquent. You can't go wrong listening to me. I still have plenty of opportunities. Lin Feng glanced at the watch on his wrist and paused for a moment. Alright, where are you? Same old place, the tea house we used to frequent in the past. Song Jiahe glanced over at Yun Hu. Lin Feng didn't talk much when he was driving. After all, he wasn't in the team, so his personality was much calmer. He didn't talk much anymore. After all, this was the biggest taboo in the business world. The less he spoke, the fewer mistakes he would make. Because no matter what you said, as long as the other party had the intention, they would find faults in your speech. That was why in the business world, people would talk less and do more. If Bo Jiao saw this side of Lin Feng, she would probably be in disbelief. But humans seemed to be like this. Their personalities were multifaceted and they had a layer of camouflage to better integrate into society. Chapter 1487. But it was just a glance. Lin Feng roughly understood what was going on. No matter how naive he was, he knew who it was for. Song Jiahe had always been a liar. If not, the Song family's business wouldn't be so big. When he saw him, he immediately stood up and placed the teacup down. "Young Master Lin, busy man, why are you standing at the door? Come in." Lin Feng walked in. After all, he came from the same courtyard. Even though things were different now, it wasn't much. After the decline of the Lin family, Lin Feng had met these people and understood the difficulty of asking them to do things for him. It wasn't like novels where they would mock you in front of your face. They were just friends who ate meat and drank with him in the past. Suddenly, they stopped contacting him. They would avoid him during gatherings. From a certain perspective, he seemed to represent bad luck. Song Jiahe was the one who didn't care about such things. Whenever there was a festival, he would definitely receive red packets. But it wasn't like today. Lin Feng felt that it was rather boring. People who hadn't experienced it wouldn't understand. When you were prosperous, there would be people following you around. When you have nothing, anyone who knows you will feel that you are unlucky. But with Yunhu around, Lin Feng's value was different. When Lin Feng raised his head, he had mostly calmed down. He walked over and sat beside Yunhu. There was only one empty seat. He removed his trench coat and hung it behind the chair. He took out a cigarette from the box on the table. Song Jiahe's mission was to invite Lin Feng out. If he interfered with other matters, he would be afraid that person wouldn't agree. He filled the teacup casually and heated up the atmosphere so that it would be easier for the two of them to talk. Yunhu didn't beat around the bush. Angry? Lin Feng's hand paused and he turned to look at him. Yunhu looked at him, his gaze deep. "I asked you out but you didn't come. I had to change the method." "How dizzy?" Lin Feng took a sip of tea. "Can't you tell me over the phone?" Yunhu remained calm. There's no atmosphere for a conversation. At this moment, Lin Feng was reminded of the Yun family's teachings. There were countless rules and regulations. There's an atmosphere for a conversation now. Lin Feng smiled. After all, everyone has to give you face. Yunhu could tell that he wasn't happy. But he had no choice. He wanted to see someone. He didn't know if that person did it intentionally or not. It didn't seem like hiding, but it was impossible to say that nothing had happened. If it was someone else. Yunhu's methods had long been used. To be able to make someone like Song Jiahe work for him. It wasn't just because of the Yun family. This showed Yunhu's usual behavior. But it was him. Yunhu gripped the teacup in his hand, slowly releasing it one by one. His fingers were long and slender, his voice faint. "Fortunately, you still have the face to let me use it." Lin Feng didn't say anything. After all, he knew that this matter couldn't be blamed on anyone. After all, there was already a gap between the two of them. This was a reality that could not be changed. Yunhu didn't think so. "The Asian Cup is over, but are you not planning to return to the team?" Chapter 1488. "I don't remember," Yunhu replied faintly. Lin Feng arched a brow. "You don't remember?" He said how great it was to play sports. Just by playing games and doing commentary, there would be a bunch of girls who liked him. He also said that there were so many beauties in the team and he wouldn't have to worry about finding a partner. With the captain as a template, he was a winner in life. In the end, he didn't even see a single beauty, just a bunch of rotten bachelors. It was worse than a university dorm. I almost fell in love with my computer. I didn't even have enough time to sleep. It was like a monk's life. Isn't it good? We won the national championship. That was what Yunhu said, but in his heart, he was thinking, I didn't join Supreme Alliance for any other reason. After Feng Yi convinced you, he understood that he was indirectly trying to convince me. Lin Feng placed his teacup down and leaned back. It was indeed good, the national championship, the Asian Cup. This is what we have always wanted. After so many years, we finally got it. But esports has always been a youthful industry. My condition can't always be this good. Besides, you should have felt it, I'm starting to deteriorate. This has nothing to do with anything else, it was just a natural reaction after reaching an age. Yunhu didn't reply because he knew Lin Feng was speaking the truth. Even if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to stop it. Lin Feng glanced at the ceiling. It was really good when we were young, it was really good to play games, but there was no other way. I would grow up one day and so would you. Ever since Supreme Alliance was established, we have been through so many things. When we weren't doing well, people looked down on us and anyone could take advantage of us because we weren't recognized by the mainstream. It wasn't easy for us to persevere until the Asian Cup. They made our captain and Little Spade retire in order to achieve the perfection in their hearts. The scariest thing in this world isn't the darkness, we survived it, the scariest thing is probably the darkness again. I can't care about it, I don't want to talk about the fame and fortune, I want to retire. Yunhu's fingers paused. Of course, that's next year. Lin Feng lifted his arm. I can't bear to leave everyone. Yunhu glanced sideways at his face, but he couldn't see anything. Just as he had said, this person had grown up. Even if he was a little tired, he wouldn't be the same as before. He wouldn't act like he did in the past. He looked at him and just smiled. Yunhu couldn't describe the feeling in his heart. It was very uncomfortable. However, she also felt that this person was ridiculously handsome when he turned into a man. Lin Feng took another sip of tea. I wonder what kind of words Fox Feng will use when he recruits people this year. You don't have to bluff me. Yunhu smiled, which was rare for him. Lin Feng thought about it and said, that's true, there's no need to bluff them. If they really can't find a partner, they can still deal with it internally. With Little Spade and Captain there, do you know that Zhao Sanpang almost jumped out of the phone? Yunhu glanced at him. You still know how to digest it internally? Lin Feng smiled. Why don't I know? Yunhu didn't want to continue the conversation since there were other people around. He didn't care, but he knew that Lin Feng had his own concerns. Especially in this kind of situation, he probably didn't want to feel that way. Chapter 1489. If we meet in the future, there's no need to do such a thing. Lin Feng played with the teacup. In front of Yunhu, he still couldn't change his bad habits. Even though he wouldn't say anything in the business world, there was no knowing what was in a person's heart. The more he said, the easier it was to be misinterpreted. But Lin Feng thought about it. This was Yunhu, not someone else, so he just said it directly. Yunhu chuckled. All right. This time, the two of them left together. Yunhu didn't drive over. 80% of it was intentional. The onlookers saw it clearly. When he sent them off, Song Jiahe was still smiling, looking at Yunhu with a deep gaze. Yunhu only showed him the side of his face. Song Jiahe immediately restrained himself. Lin Feng's next actions proved that he was still Lin Feng. Even though the Lin family had failed, his temperament was still there. He patted his shoulder with a smile and casually threw him a cigarette. Contact me when you're free. He was still free and easy. That face was beautiful, but upon closer inspection, it became more angular. Song Jiahe roughly understood why his biggest partner couldn't bear to part with this person from the Lin family. He introduced many people to him. He always told them to scram. But he never said anything harsh in front of him. It was probably because he had been through so much, but he still had a trace of youthful spirit. Of course, there were people who looked for young shampoo. But that was different. Lin Feng had something different. For the people in their circle, as long as their families failed, they would lose all their edges and become extremely decadent. Even though Lin Feng wasn't the same as before, it was strange that he could still be like this after accepting everything. Song Jiahe was a social network person. He knew the attitude people had towards Lin Feng. That subtlety could sometimes destroy many people. In the past, Song Jiahe had always thought that young Master Yun was interested in Lin Feng's looks. After all, there weren't many people with such integrity in their circle. But it depended on who wanted it. If it was young Master Yun, there would be a bunch of people coming for him without even saying a word. Now, Song Jiahe understood that it had nothing to do with looks. It was probably because he liked Lin Feng for too long. Or as people often said, good-looking skin is the same, but interesting souls are one in a million. Only young Master Yun himself knew what kind of Lin Feng he liked. Song Jiahe had always known that he was just a pimp in the eyes of others. Speaking of which, this was his first time pimping someone so pure. Just for a meeting. Song Jiahe looked at the two of them and put the cigarette in his mouth. They were really ruining his reputation. He, young Master Song, had never done such a pure and affectionate business. Some people probably didn't understand. They were used to seeing power and sex deals. When they looked at the two of them again, they always felt that this was probably what love looked like, even if they weren't together. In reality, even though Lin Feng was enjoying himself, when Yun Hu sat beside him, he couldn't help but want to say something. The distance between them was too close, so close that he could even smell the aroma of the tea on his body. In addition, the two of them were in the car. It felt a little weird when it was quiet. After all, he was the one who started the conversation. Fox Feng told us to gather at the club tomorrow. Have you received the message? Yun Hu glanced at him, replying slowly, I was the one who informed you. Lin Feng, you're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.